all the people that have gone out there against the mainstream media and said, you're going to call us racist? You're going to call us potential Timothy McVeighs? Fuck you. War.
Quite sure he's right. An obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
War.
This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Tuesday, March 4th, 2025, the 44th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Welcome to all of you watching live. I'm streaming today on Substack for the first time. And so if you're watching over there, hello. It's going to be an interesting experience. We'll see how that goes. I don't know if people watch live streams over there yet. I've started to see them pop up when I open the Substack app, and occasionally I'll click in and just see how the feed looks. I haven't actually watched a show over there yet, but it presents an interesting possibility. I think maybe I'm going to change the Wednesday live stream, the subscriber stream, into something that streams directly on Substack and streams live on Rumble to Rumble Premium subscribers. And I'm going to toy with Rumble Premium in the second half of the show. I think probably an hour and a half, 2 hours in, I'm going to switch over to Rumble Premium, and we'll see how that goes. Everybody who already has Rumble Premium is just going to continue watching the feed, and the people who don't will get that screen, and then you can attempt to find it on one of the other platforms. If not, it's all just going to be posted after the stream ends. It'll be on YouTube. It'll be on Substack, so you'll have access to it. And so I'm going to experiment with that program as we go forward and see if that sort of thing works for people who are subscribing and works for, the qualifications for what you have to do to participate in Rumble's program, which is, an important part of the process in trying to make some money on this show and supporting Rumble in their mission for maintaining a free speech platform while being able to support that project financially so that there is an option away from Google Video. Okay, and with that, let's go ahead and get into some of the stuff I want to talk about today. Amazing clip from Rachel Maddow last night after what we talked about yesterday. We discussed the article in the Financial Times, hijacking the revolution, or hijacking Trump's revolution, and the reactions among people in the mainstream that somehow this is the end of the world as we know it or have known it. This is the collapse of, quote unquote, our democracy. The global regime and its system is ending, at least temporarily. We heard from James Carville last week. He thought that the move was to just play dead for the Democrats. There's nothing we can do to seize the attention back from Donald Trump. So what we're going to do is play dead. And with that, maybe people will forget about us. They'll just focus on Trump and the Republicans, the good and the bad. And then the Democrats will ride in with whatever messaging they need at the end to win the day. And we discussed hijacking the narrative of the Great Reset yesterday. I put that out as a clip after the show, or maybe this morning. So check that out if you haven't. But before we get into Maddow, actually, I want to put up one of the most interesting videos of the day. This thing has gone viral. I don't know quite what to make of it. There's the surface level take, and let's go ahead and watch it.
I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
Now, that's super annoying. That's maybe I should have played this one first. I thought that we would be able to get better sound on that one, but let's just do this one and you'll get the idea.
I will immediately bring prices down starting on day one.
That ain't true. That's what you just heard. Since day one of Donald Trump's presidency, prices are not down, they're up. Inflation is getting worse, not better. The prices of groceries, gas, housing, eggs, of essentials. It's not getting better, it's getting worse.
So that is the quote unquote shit that ain't true video. And that was Chuck Schumer, Elizabeth Warren, and Cory Booker, so-called Democrat senators. The adults, those are the adults. When the adults were supposed to get back in the room at the beginning of the fake and illegitimate Biden administration, those are some of the adults that were going back in the room, and they are all doing the shit that ain't true video. And so what you saw initially was 22 senators doing the shit that ain't true video, all on the same script. And people obviously have compared that to those video collages of local newscasters all reading the same scripts throughout COVID. And I don't know exactly what to make of the video that these senators have made, because something about it is just a little too weird. That 22 Democrat senators are reading the exact same script in the exact same way. And I had a thought. It's conspiracy theory, I got to tell you. Unsubstantiated, baseless claims, no evidence, a conspiracy theory. Is that the sort of thing where a script could be written and then all of that could just be AI renderings of each of these degenerate communists reading out that script as written? Either that or they're just all getting the same message and putting it out to all of their supporters, knowing that this would happen. And is this what they wanted? Did they want everybody to just say, oh, the Democrats don't actually have anything to say? They're all just saying the same exact thing. They're just giving the story as written. Is that really the strategy? I mean, yesterday we saw that Politico article. It talked about the messaging changes, the image-based changes that they needed to make for their presentation. Hey, maybe we should actually go out into our communities. Maybe we should go to churches. Maybe we might meet people in these places and they might see how good Democrats are. And I imagine if they walked into churches, they would probably begin sizzling right away. Although knowing the state of American churches, maybe that's not true. Regardless, what a strange solution to their messaging problem. Hey, we all need to get on the same page. We need to get everybody else on the same page. So let's all read off the exact same page. Who planned that? Hard to say. Now, I know there's a lot of problems with maybe AI did this take. I get it. So AI did it for each one and then they all posted on their own social media. Seems unlikely. All their social medias are under control by someone and it got pumped out through there. Seems unlikely. But a few years ago, I would have said that it would seem unlikely for people I knew with college education, successful people with a lot of money and important jobs to be driving around a city wearing 2 masks in their cars. And upon seeing that, I realized, well, some unlikely things are bound to happen eventually. Now, I was talking about Rachel Maddow and the discussion from yesterday. We are approaching the end of the world, apparently, for people like Rachel Maddow. Here she is, I think last night, I guess. I don't know when her show is on anymore. She doesn't have it every day anymore, I don't think. But then again, I don't watch MSNBC. I just see these clips come up online.
Of additional dollars worth of imported goods in just about 3 weeks if the new U.S. tariffs were still in place. Mexico's economy ministry said that President Claudia Sheinbaum was expected to announce Mexico's response during a news conference this morning.
Who is this for? I mean, tell me who is the swing state voter in Pennsylvania or Nevada or North Carolina whose issue in this election was, I don't think Vladimir Putin is getting enough of what he wants. Tell me who is the median voter in some bellwether county in Arizona who thinks, you know what, Russian cyber attacks have gotten so bogged down and difficult. It's getting so it's really difficult to just ransomware a hospital in Arizona these days. Isn't there anything we can do to help with that? Is there a single voter in the United States who thinks that Canada is the bad guy in the world and Russia is the good guy in the world? And so let's threaten Canada and learn Russian. Is there anyone? Who is this for? And what did they do to get all of this? What has Russia given up to get this list of things that they have received in the first 6 weeks that Donald Trump has been back in the White House? He's the deal maker, right? What's the other side of the deal?
The other side of the deal is that the global regime is defeated. That's the other side of the deal. That's the goal.
This weekend, the foreign policy chief of the European Union said, quote, the free world needs a new leader. The rest of the free world is trying. This weekend, the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the President of France announced that they would form a new coalition of the willing to support Ukraine. And they hoped they might get support from the United States for that effort. The United States, our government, has changed sides in the world. And it seems pretty clear they will not be doing that. Our government now sides with Russia and against America's allies. And we spent years trying to figure out why the Republican Party and its new leader would be inclined in that direction. It now sort of doesn't matter. What matters is the new reality is that he controls the government, and that's the way that he has changed the U.S. government's orientation in the world. And it really is hard to imagine what else Putin might want that Trump hasn't already given him in just these 6 weeks.
All right. So Politico actually came out with an article declaring that Keir Starmer was the new leader of the free world. I think I actually have that link somewhere here. We'll just take a look at that for a second, but then get back on track here. Yeah, here we are. Keir Starmer, unlikely leader of the free world. And they go through talking about how well he did over the weekend. He's no drama starmer. I guess that's I did like a New Jersey, Brooklyn, British accent all at the same time. That was terrible. I apologize for everyone having to hear that. So they go down through the story of Starmer's weekend and how he just happens to be the perfect person to deal with Donald Trump. The world is turning over. We're going to talk about some of the Ukraine stuff later. But she's also talking about some of this reaction that's happening right now was because of what began last night at midnight. And those were the first of Donald Trump's tariffs. I think it was 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and then a 20% tariff on China. And so we are applying tariffs to some of our major trading partners. And this was one of the articles that was receiving all the chatter on the morning shows today. The Wall Street Journal from yesterday, Trump takes the dumbest tariff plunge. And of course, with headlines like these, you can wait a little while before these become the dumbest possible headlines. They are never, ever, 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 ever right about these things. One would think that they would stop writing these things and they would just try to start being right at some point so that people might then begin to trust them again, so that their credibility would increase. But they can't do that because they're in an existential crisis. And we've been talking about that quite a bit over the last couple of years. But in an existential crisis, you don't have time to do things like tell the truth or rebuild your credibility. You just have to run around with your hair on fire, hoping that everyone else lights themselves on fire too, and that maybe the whole house is eventually burned down. And I have no idea where this metaphor is going. But let's get into the article. President Trump likes to cite the stock market when it's rising as a sign of his policy success. So what does he think about Monday's plunge? The Dow Jones Industrial Average took a 650-point header after he announced that he'll hit Mexico and Canada on Tuesday with 25% tariffs. And it has continued to go down today. And I would guess that Donald Trump is probably unbothered by that because this is PR, and the number on the stock markets is in many ways PR. And I understand that people have investments in stocks and that their portfolios are dependent on the market. But unless you're trading day to day, if you have stocks of companies that you think are going to be successful in the future and you're just holding those stocks, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter to me at all. I like to buy the dip. So Mr. Trump said at the White House there was, quote, no room left to negotiate with the two American trade treaty partners. Some of his smarter advisors have been hoping he'd start renegotiating the USMCA and delay the tariffs. But Mr. Trump wants tariffs for their own sake, which he says will usher in a new golden age. So he wants them for their own sake so that they'll usher in a new golden age. Well, that means that he wants them for the sake of ushering in the new golden age. So that's the argument. It's not that he wants them for their own sake. And of course, they have to frame it that way. Donald Trump is a mean man and a narcissist and a bully. So these tariffs are to bully these other countries. We've courted Mr. Trump's ire by calling the Mexico and Canada levies the dumbest in history. And we may have understated the point. Mr. Trump is whacking friends, not adversaries. His taxes will hit every cross-border transaction. And the North American vehicle market is so interconnected that some cars cross a border as many as 8 times as they're assembled. Well, that sounds utterly retarded. Will this make that retardation cease? I bet it will. Mr. Trump also objected when we reported an analysis by the Anderson Economic Group that the 25% tariff will raise the cost of a full-sized SUV assembled in North America by $9,000 and a pickup truck by $8,000. Is this how the new Republican Party plans on helping working-class voters? Well, no, but here's the question. Is that true? Or did the Anderson Economic Group just make that up? And let's find out about the Anderson Economic Group for just a second. You know how I love to go off on these. Let me see if they have a Wikipedia page. Eventually, you can just get to early life. And it turns out, hold for processing. Well, they look like a happy bunch. I went to their webpage. Nothing is jumping out to me. Let's move on. I can look at that later. Mr. Trump is volatile, and who knows how long he'll keep the tariffs in place. Retaliation that hits certain states and businesses may also cause him to reconsider sooner than he imagines. Investors are trying to read this uncertainty as they also watch growing evidence of a slowing U.S. economy. Unbridled tariff man was always going to be a big economic risk in a second term, and here we are. Unbridled tariff man, says the consistently wrong Wall Street Journal. But you know who's not consistently wrong? The global communist billionaire Warren Buffett. Here he is on, wait a second, is it CBS? I think it's CBS. Yeah, CBS Sunday Morning.
How you see the state of the economy right now?
Well, I think that's the most interesting subject in the world, but I won't talk. I can't talk about it now. I really can't.
How do you think tariffs will affect the economy?
I mean, tariffs are actually, we've had a lot of experience with them. They're an act of war to some degree.
How do you think tariffs will impact inflation?
Over time.
They're an act of war to some degree, he just said. An act of war. And perhaps he's right about that. Who's being tariffed? We'll get to that.
There are attacks on goods. I mean, you know, the tooth fairy doesn't pay them. I mean, and see, you always have to just, and then what? You always have to ask that question in economics. Always say, and then what?
So is there an answer for that when people say, you know, inflation persists, consumer prices keep going up, when's the end in sight?
No, prices will be higher 10 years from now and 20 years from now and 30 years from now.
And what do you think about what's happening in Washington right now? About efforts
I think it's Washington.
Yeah.
It's, you know, technology changes things, all kinds of things, but Washington is Washington. And the problem with politics is that you tend to have to make tiny compromises as you go along.
And what do you think about Elon Musk's efforts to cut?
Well, I better not get into that.
Do you talk to him at all?
I've talked to Elon a few times.
And any thoughts about his current efforts in Washington? No, you've always been bullish on American companies.
Majority of any money I manage will always be in the United States.
All right. So there is a man who has benefited greatly from a controlled economy, a top-down controlled economy, from the global regime bankers down through global governance organizations, through organizations like the World Economic Forum, the World Trade Organization, the World Health Organization. When you know what the plan is from the very, very top, it's easy to take advantage of that knowledge throughout the entire system. And Warren Buffett has done very well for himself by doing that for a very long time. And so he says the tariffs are an act of war against whom? It turns out they're an act of war against the true enemy, which is the global evil twin. And if you are not familiar with the concept, I talk often about good twin, evil twin. There are two factions, at least two factions. Everything is at least two things. In all the nations around the world, there is a faction that supports the one world international rules-based order, the global regime and its agenda. They are centralized and centralizing. Things centralize more over time. Monopolies are created. Companies and countries that go along with the agenda are given certain advantages, while the countries and companies and individuals, of course, that don't go along with the agenda are punished, so that everybody will ultimately be incentivized or punished back into falling in line. And in opposition to that, there is the centralizing force of sovereignty, of individualism, liberty, freedom, whatever you want to call it, nationalism on the nation state level, and companies that actually are prepared to operate in a merit-based free market economy, which is not what we have now. We can talk about capitalism until we're blue in the face, but we don't have free markets if everything is controlled from the top down. They call it free trade, but it's not free trade. It is controlled trade based on the needs of the liberal international rules-based order. And so the good twin and evil twin factions exist in every country around the world. And what we see now is the battle between the good twin and the evil twin worldwide, and the good twin is winning. So tariffs disrupt the top-down control of the global economy. When he says tariffs are an act of war, the act of war is against the true enemy, which is the global evil twin. And at the top of that, the global governance bodies, transnational corporations, and the regime bankers at the top. And so Warren Buffett is right. It is an act of war, but it's not an act of war against the American people because they're going to see their prices raised. People have options of what to buy. And as more manufacturing is re-onshored, which is Trump's agenda in the first term, in the pause term, and in this term, as more of that happens, there'll be more American goods available. And as the economic system is more protectionist, presumably, Americans will have more money in their pockets. The tariffs are also supposed to replace the federal income tax. I think Americans would probably like to have that money back. And will that offset the difference in the price of a truck, assuming that that study is correct, and it's almost definitely not? Well, yeah, you might think so. And in a principled manner, if that evens out, which way would be more American? Which would be the right way to do things? And it seems pretty clear that charging foreign companies to sell their goods in the United States is a more principled, moral, pro-American approach than confiscating the property of the American people. I don't think that's a hard argument to make. An act of war against the American people would be implementing a federal income tax and a property tax and a list of all the other taxes without any representation, without real elections, without ratified amendments saying that the people accept their government doing that. That seems like an act of war against the American people. And of course it is. It's just one that we all take for granted because we were raised in this country, in this society, as it has existed. And that's just part of the game. This is Donald Trump trade advisor, Peter Navarro, today on CNBC. This is over on Truth Social, posted there by Citizen Free Press.
Well, let's start with Warren Buffett. I was amused to see Mr. Buffett's statement when, in fact, Joe, I don't know if you remember this, but Warren Buffett wrote the definitive article on why trade deficits are dangerous. Warren Buffett wrote this beautiful article about how if you continue to run trade deficits in America, pretty much foreign countries will own everything you have. And he had it exactly right. He probably forgot he wrote this. In terms of the economics of inflation and tariffs, there's a couple of things to say here. Our experience in the first term, Joe, was very clear. We did not have inflation. We had price stability. When we put the tariffs in on China, steel, aluminum, solar, dishwashers, and all of that, no inflation. And the reason why is a complex chain of macro things that begins with the fact that the exporting countries, which are dependent on our markets, absorb a large share of the tariffs. And then you have the supply chain effects moving around. As you know, Joe, when our trade deficit goes down, the dollar goes up, imports are cheaper, so that brings it down. And in the limit, and this is where President Trump wants to go, we have more and more investment here that raises productivity and real wages, and that mutes inflation as well. And don't forget the 3 Ds. We got deregulation, Doge, and drill, baby, drill. That's the Trump strategy to bring down inflation dramatically. And anything that happens with tariffs, Joe, is second order small.
Deregulation, yes. Doge, obviously, less government spending, less needs to be extracted from the quote unquote American taxpayer. That number needs to be zero, obviously. And people are going to have to make that decision for themselves, by the way. And drill, baby, drill. Energy prices are at the foundation of the prices of everything else. So presumably, when America is energy dominant and energy prices are decreased dramatically, it seems, if the trajectory is what I believe it to be, why would the prices continue to go up? Because of tariffs. It's a preposterous argument. Again, the act of war is against the global evil twin and their system. It's not against the American people. And it's not going to hit them with prices. Donald Trump weighed in on Truth Social this morning. If companies move to the United States, there are no tariffs. Another great point. If you want to sell your goods in America, and you don't want to deal with the tariffs, produce those goods in America. Right? Foreign-owned company producing goods in America. That situation already exists. Then it's beneficial to American workers, and it's still beneficial to the company. It's just not beneficial to workers and economies in other countries to the same degree it is now. And again, we talk about this with Canada, and we'll get to Canada in just a second. But the fact that so many of these goods are planned from the top to be produced in other countries and sold into America to take advantage of our consumer base, that's a factor of the global regime's economy. It doesn't have to work like that. Let us continue. Yeah, let's get to Canada right now. In fact, this is the Canadian Ron DeSantis.
At 12:01 a.m.
I mean, honestly, look at him. It's Ron DeSantis. They cast this guy to be the Canadian Ron DeSantis. And I said that like in, I don't know, 2020 or 2021. I've been saying that for years. It is really funny, though. He is like the Con Inc. Fake populist of Canada.
President Trump stabbed America's best friend in the back. My message to the president is this: Canada will fight back. We will defend our people and our economy, and we will put Canada first. There's no doubt that our economy will suffer, but so will yours, President Trump. In fact, you're already paying the price, with trillions of dollars erased in stock market value over the last month of these threats. Already, Americans are paying higher gas prices, as at midnight, a new American gas tax kicked in on U.S. working-class taxpayers and motorists. Your workers will soon start losing jobs they had upgrading Canadian raw materials, which, by the way, you were getting at an incredible and ridiculous bargain. And your businesses will be selling fewer products to your closest neighbor. And that's only the beginning. While Canadians are slow to anger and quick to forgive, once provoked, we fight back. And we will fight back.
That's the guy that people believe is going to save Canada from Governor Trudeau. That guy ain't saving anything from anybody. That was ridiculous. Oh, Canada, nobody's scared of you. Man. Pierre Poilievre. All right. Very, very intimidating. I'm sure Donald Trump was quaking in his boots over all of that. Let us go to Governor Trudeau himself. He was on fire today, by the way. Here we go. Okay, yes. There we go.
Immediately, and in 21 days, 120 billion.
He only does the French for a few seconds.
Our tariffs
there we
will
go.
remain in place until the U.S. tariffs are withdrawn, and not a moment sooner. And should these tariffs not cease, we are in active and ongoing discussions with provinces and territories to pursue several non-tariff measures. measures which will demonstrate that there are no winners in a trade war. Now, just like I did a month ago, I want to speak first directly to the American people. We don't want this. We want to work with you as a friend and ally. And we don't want to see you hurt either. But your government has chosen to do this to you. As of this morning, markets are down, and inflation is set to rise dramatically all across your country. Your government has chosen to put American jobs at risk, at the thousands of workplaces that succeed because of materials from Canada or because of consumers in Canada, or both. They've chosen to raise costs for American consumers on everyday essential items like groceries and gas, on major purchases like cars and homes, and everything in between. They've chosen to harm American national security, impeding access to the abundant critical minerals, energy, building materials, and fertilizers that we have and that the United States needs to grow and prosper. They've chosen to launch a trade war that will, first and foremost, harm American families. They've chosen to sabotage their own agenda that was supposed to usher in a new golden age for the United States. And they've chosen to undermine the incredible work we've done together to tackle the scourge that is fentanyl, a drug that must be wiped from the face of the earth. So on that point, let me be crystal clear. There is absolutely no justification or need whatsoever for these tariffs today. Now, the legal pretext your government is using to bring in these tariffs is that Canada is apparently unwilling to help in the fight against illegal fentanyl. Well, that is totally false. Let's look at the facts. Our border is already safe and secure.
Well, congratulations on your border, Governor Trudeau. So Canada is a member of the British Commonwealth, and we talked about the British Commonwealth a bit yesterday and how maybe I can pull this up. It's good to remind ourselves with the visual. We went through this article yesterday. Zelensky meets King Charles as calls grow to cancel Trump UK state visit. This was in Newsweek. And there we have the so-called king, the monarch who controls the British Commonwealth to the extent it still exists. And there is the comedic actor of the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, to the extent that the Ukraine still exists. And of course it does not. If you are king and a comedic actor pretending to be president of a fake country shows up in a sweatsuit to talk war, not a real king. So the longest running reality show in the history of the world seems to have ended. The British royal family is a ridiculous farce and should be recognized as such. And Canada, a Commonwealth nation, as part of that British Commonwealth under the Crown, that is just through and through the global regime, Canada is controlled ostensibly, at least in the narrative, by the global evil twin. So the act of war would be against that global evil twin, and the relationship with Canada will be sorted out. And, you know, Canada is going to become the 51st state. And so I'm really not worried about their fertilizer. But thank you for your concern, Justin Trudeau. Along those same lines, this was the Daily Mail yesterday. Windsor Castle opens St. George's Hall to Muslims observing Ramadan. as they gather in the ceremonial room for the first time in history to break their fast. Now, if this is what's happening in Windsor Castle, then there is no more British royal family. If a comedic actor pretending to be president of a fake country shows up to greet the king in a sweatsuit, and then Windsor Castle is filled with 360 Muslim guests, and hey, no offense to Muslims, but let's be honest here. Doesn't matter who it is. If it was 360 American rednecks, same thing. You don't have a royal family anymore. There is no more British royalty. There is no more British Commonwealth. And to analyze things as though there was still seems crazy. Maggie in the chat says, I'm 99% certain that the crown is gone. I don't know about 99.9%, but I would suggest that it's higher than people would imagine and on its way, on the path in that direction at the very least. I don't know if it's 99.9. Maybe it is. That's very optimistic. You could be right. Misfit Angie asks if Pierre Poilievre has Ron DeSantis's lifted boots, old Bootsy DeSantis, and the answer is I don't know. That would be great, honestly, if he did have the DeSantis boots, but I cannot be sure about that. What I can do is find a picture of old Bootsy. He was a little alligator, and sometimes he's a little storm chaser. Old Bootsy DeSantis. Oh, man. Hold for processing. I felt like we had a really good rhythm going there, and now I've totally destroyed it just to find pictures of Ron DeSantis's boots. Really unprofessional. Hey, that's how things go sometimes, you know? Let's just, I mean, at this point, we got to go ahead and do it. So I hope you're in for the long haul. Where is he? Ah, yes, there we are. Let's go ahead and get this to be part of what in the world's happening here. Oh. I'm not going to explain what's wrong with my internet right now. We're going to have to move on from Bootsy DeSantis unless you guys can find it. Makes me sad. Makes me very, very sad. Those were the days, I got to say. In the chat, it's Tony Man, $5. Man, I need a Boo Bapa Muba Banca. I don't know if that qualifies for a Candy Manning on Una Panuna Banca. And the truth is, you have to say Anna Paulina Luna. Just saying Ma Buba Banca Donka or whatever you said is not going to get us there. I can't just relax the rules for one person because then I have to relax the rules for everybody that says anything remotely like Una Panuna Banca. Nobody, 777, $10. Thanks, Chris. I hope to see you again in Deadwood. God bless. And I believe you will see me again in Deadwood, Jim. That's going to be in August of this year. And this weekend, we are heading off to GART in Las Vegas. You can get your in-person passes. I think there are still a few of those left. We're in a considerably bigger venue from what I have been led to understand this time, or maybe just bigger and not considerably bigger. It's not like twice as big or anything, but there's a lot more room this time. So I think that there are some in-person passes available. And of course, there are virtual tickets as well. Badlands Media Democracy.com/events is where you can find that. And I suppose we had better come back on Governor Trudeau once again.
8 years, you and I have worked together.
By the way, this is his message to Donald. He addresses him as Donald, not President Trump, but Donald. This is the condescending tone of the servants of the global regime. Now, if you ask me, I'd say that's our boy True, and he's just doing what he does, but surface level, clearly disrespectful, and the disrespect, I believe, is intended. They do not want to call him president, as though he's not getting inaugurated later today or something.
We've done big things. We signed a historic deal that has created record jobs and growth in both of our countries. We've done big things together on the world stage, as Canada and the US have done together for decades, for generations. And now we should be working together to ensure even greater prosperity for North Americans in a very uncertain and challenging world. Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do. We two friends fighting is exactly what our opponents around the world want to see.
That kind of does make some sense, doesn't it? In the our boy True understanding that Donald Trump and Governor Trudeau are on the same side, and that their opponents around the world actually want to see the two of them fighting, because that would mean that our boy True is fighting back against Donald Trump on their behalf. It's not like there's some country trying to take down both the US and Canada, and we need to unify against that threat. I mean, unless you're talking about the global regime, but again, that would only work under the our boy True understanding. Now, you could just say, well, yeah, but this is Fidel Castro's son. Of course, he's just going to lie about these things. He's going to say whatever he needs to say. He's using this as a rhetorical flourish to make it sound like the United States and Canada are, of course, on the same side. But, you know, this stuff's hilarious.
And now, to my fellow Canadians, I won't sugarcoat it. This is going to be tough, even though we're all going to pull together, because that's what we do. We will use every tool at our disposal so Canadian workers and businesses can weather this storm. From expanding EI benefits and making them more flexible to providing direct supports to businesses, we will be there as needed to help. But Canada, make no mistake, no matter how long this lasts, no matter what the cost, the federal government and other orders of government will be there for you. We will defend Canadian jobs. We will take measures to prevent predatory behavior that threatens Canadian companies because of the impacts of this trade war, leaving them open to takeovers. We will relentlessly fight to protect our economy. We will stand up for Canadians every single second of every single day, because this country is worth fighting for. Les derniers mois.
Good luck. I think we're going to be okay. I really feel like we're going to be okay. Now, in the chat, while Governor Trudeau was speaking, there were multiple requests. There were multiple calls out for Anna Paulina Luna. Now, I can't just do this over and over again. Actually, I can't. The most 2025 online thing ever would be for me to get rich just playing the Una Panuna Bonka video over and over and over again because people don't stop leaving Rumble rants in the chat talking about Anna Paulina Luna. That would be incredible. Okay, let's continue on with the tariffs. Donald Trump explained a very simple aspect of this arrangement. He said, please explain to Governor Trudeau of Canada that when he puts on a retaliatory tariff on the United States, our reciprocal tariff will immediately increase by a like amount. So Governor Trudeau is attempting to fight the tariff fire with his own tariff fire, but his own tariff fire causes an extra round of tariff fire. The Terrifier. Oh, man, this episode is not going to be called that, but it could be called that in the future. I'm just saying the tariff fire. Terrifier. I'm going to have to just keep a note on that. It's a weird day, you know? What are you going to do? It's the first day of the rest of our lives, I guess. It's always that. Okay, so let's go back to MSNBC today because I heard this clip on War Room this morning, and I thought, what an odd turn of phrase, one that I wasn't used to hearing very much. And it seems like, much like the messaging coordination that we saw in the first clip from the beginning of the episode, this was a coordinated messaging campaign. Here we are.
We're still seeing floated the notion that there could be more tariffs on specific products and retaliatory tariffs. We know this is a thing he loves, but the uncertainty that Greg's talking about permeates all of this. And to your point, does nothing positive to the animal spirits, to businesses, to consumers who are just frankly wondering how this is all going to play out.
Overnight, imposing tariffs on America's closest allies. The strategy from the White House seems to be
serious voices. And that woman in the last clip, well, she took off her glasses to get extra serious. In the meantime, it's incredible.
To shed as many friends as possible, as fast as possible. And the long-term question is, does that leave America safer, stronger, and greater, or does it leave it weaker? I mean, if you just look, the risk at the moment is you push the Europeans closer to China, you push the Canadians closer to China, you push the South Koreans closer to a nuclear weapon. I mean, it's hard to see how this strategy plays out well for the United States.
Pushed the South Koreans closer to a nuclear weapon. The only way the South Koreans could get a nuclear weapon in a world where nuclear weapons existed is if we gave it to them, or if everyone just recognized that it's actually just Korea, and the South Koreans would then therefore have nuclear weapons by virtue of being Korea, because of course, Little Rocket Man has nuclear weapons.
In the long run.
It's hard to see how it plays out well in the short run as well.
By the way, this man's name is Edward Luce. He is a ridiculous figure, but he's also one of the main contributors to the Financial Times, one of the key mouthpieces of the global regime worldwide. He is one of the people who communicates to global elites and tells them what they're supposed to know, what their official story is, the things that they are supposed to repeat as slogans. Edward Luce is way up in that information stream. Oh no, I just rewound the video all the way to the beginning. Here we go.
If you caught them in private moments, is that friendship and economic deals between the US and Russia, between Trump and Putin, will unleash all kinds of animal spirits and energy deals. And of course, the deal for Ukrainian minerals, which presumably in one form or another, Zelensky will be corralled into accepting. That's going to be boom time for American businesses. His view of the world is about deals. It's also about an affinity with Putin. I'm not overlooking that, but it's chiefly his. If you want to summarize Trump's view of economics, it's about having lots of deals and punishing those who are in surplus with the United States. There are no friends in that world. There's just deals that Trump has skin in the game in. And so that's how they would justify this as a success, because there is no sort of ethical, philosophical, or strategic justification for what he's doing.
And so the world he's describing, the world Maddow was describing earlier, is one that has to be controlled from the top down. There's no way for them to get the world they're talking about without that. He's saying that there are no friends. Well, that's not necessarily true. There can be bilateral alliances. It's just no more multilateral pacts, these massive global treaties, and that level of control where everyone is operating toward the same goals in implementing the same agenda. That is what they view as us having friends and allies around the world. That's not a realistic situation. We have in our personal lives friends and allies. There are people that we are close to. And then there are people that we are kind of close to who are our acquaintances, and we occasionally will pursue common interests together or activities that we enjoy doing together. Someone might have a tennis partner or a golf partner. That's who they play tennis or golf with, but it doesn't really mean that they want to spend their entire day with that person all the time. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. You might have people that you run into at the bar and you enjoy a conversation every month or so when that happens, but you're not about to invite them over to babysit your kids. You know, people have different purposes in life. And the same is true when we have partnerships in a more multipolar world order. Trade is one of the things that keeps those relationships equal and level, and tariffs can be a leverage point in keeping those relationships on steady ground. So it's not about the two countries pursuing the same agenda on behalf of someone else, the global bankers. It's about them pursuing their best interests in alignment with one another when their interests find a point of agreement. And that's what keeps the relationship steady. And that can actually last for a long time. And if one country becomes abusive or somehow fails to live up to their end of the bargain, well, the agreement can be retracted and that country might suffer a loss as a result of that. That's what we're seeing now, except it's between good twin and evil twin. Whatever stability there may have been at some point, and that was probably only by force and coercion or corruption and compromise. Well, that's gone. And so the countries are now pulling back, focusing on their own interests, no longer willing to subject themselves to the abusive nature of the global regime, just as we wouldn't in a personal relationship if someone was abusive in a friendship, an acquaintance. If your golf partner was stealing money out of your wallet every time you were taking a swing, that person wouldn't be your golf partner very long. You don't just stand there and tolerate abuse indefinitely. And that is what we've done. We've been taught and indoctrinated to believe that that abuse is just how things work. It's a natural part of the system. And actually, our abusers, they're the ones protecting us. They'll tell us, don't you know how much worse it could be without us? So Edward Luce is, again, making the case on behalf of the enemy. And you heard that phrase, animal spirits, pop up a couple of times. It has actually been popping up consistently when I went back to look for this, consistently throughout Donald Trump's third term. Animal spirits is a term used by John Maynard Keynes in his 1936 book, The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, to describe the instincts, proclivities, and emotions that seemingly influence human behavior, which can be measured in terms of consumer confidence. The original passage by Keynes reads, even apart from the instability due to speculation, there is the instability due to the characteristic of human nature that a large proportion of our positive activities depend on spontaneous optimism rather than on a mathematical expectation, whether moral or hedonistic or economic. Most probably of our decisions to do something positive, the full consequences of which will be drawn out over many days to come, can only be taken as a result of animal spirits, of a spontaneous urge to action rather than inaction, and not as the outcome of a weighted average of quantitative benefits multiplied by quantitative probabilities. And that is a fine enough observation, something that has been observed throughout the history of philosophy. What motivates people to act? It is not generally reason alone. There is some impulse, some maxim that propels them to act. So in the conversation here, the idea is that Donald Trump's confidence coming in, the confidence in the business community due to some of the things Peter Navarro was talking about, deregulation, not so much Doge, but that too, drill, baby, drill, and some of the other Trump economic aspects. The idea was that provoked all of these animal spirits. People just had this belief that the economy was going to improve, and therefore the economy did improve. And we talk about phenomena like that quite often, referencing Nick Land's hyperstition. The formation of these beliefs, the way that people act upon those beliefs, creates a reality based on those beliefs where none existed before. So we heard throughout the fake campaign of one Kamala that it was a vibes-based campaign, a joy-based campaign. Apparently that was an animal spirits-based campaign. And it's odd, isn't it, to be, conjuring animal spirits in the first place. I found that part of it particularly strange. But let's go to CNBC from January 20th, 25, what we commonly understand as the inauguration of Donald Trump's third term. And we'll see what happens this evening. Stanley Druckenmiller says animal spirits are back in markets because of Trump, with CEOs giddy. Billionaire investor Stanley Druckenmiller believes Donald Trump's reelection renewed a jolt of speculative enthusiasm in the markets and surging optimism within businesses. I've been doing this for 49 years, and we're probably going from the most anti-business administration to the opposite. We do a lot of talking to CEOs and companies on the ground, and I'd say CEOs are somewhere between relieved and giddy, so we're a believer in animal spirits. While the notable investor who now runs Duquesne Family Office is bullish on the economy in the near term, he remains somewhat cautious on the stock market because of elevated bond yields. He revealed he is holding on to his short against treasuries, effectively betting that the bond prices will fall and yields will rise. Let's jump down near the end here. Trump's trade memorandum to be issued Monday would not impose tariffs yet. His camp has been reportedly discussing a schedule of graduated tariffs increasing by about 2 to 5% a month on trading partners. Clearly, that's not what's being pursued. Druckenmiller once managed George Soros's quantum fund and shot to fame after helping make a $10 billion bet against the British pound in 1992. So he helped George Soros destroy the British pound. He later oversaw $12 billion as president of Duquesne Capital Management before closing his firm in 2010. So he was also talking about Donald Trump's animal spirits. The business community was just over the moon about these animal spirits that could be provoked and brought out by this crazed, vibes-based approach to Donald Trump. We saw the same from about the same time. This is The Hill. Trump's tariff plans could be harming his animal spirit investors. This on the 17th, before he was even supposedly sworn in at that ridiculous ceremony in the Capitol, where, what do we have? Hillary Clinton and Joseph Robinette Biden and Kamala, and who else was there? Was Obama there without his husband? So Donald Trump's going to ruin the animal spirits with these tariffs. And he's supposed to feel scared, and we're all supposed to feel scared that the tariffs are going to destroy the American economy because he is just apparently ruining the vibes. Cara Maga, $20 in the chat. Anna Paulina Luna, she says. So. Candy Manning, Anna Paulina Luna. Let's go to some other domestic news. Then we will talk a little bit more about the significance of the March 4th date. And then we'll get into some of the abroad stuff. This is the Gateway Pundit from yesterday. 21 Republican secretaries of state demand action from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem to protect elections from non-citizen voting. Apparently, they believe they are unable to do that on their own, so they need to call in the help of the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, that department that was created in the wake of 9/11, and that department that makes you wonder, hey, what homeland are they talking about? How does this Department of Homeland Security have branches in like 60 different countries? What homeland are they talking about? And I would suggest that at least prior to this current Trump administration, or prior to the first term, let's say, they were talking about that global homeland, the global evil twins homeland. Doesn't seem like they're too interested in protecting America, but of course they are the department tasked with dealing with immigration issues, at least according to the television and what we see coming through on a daily basis, that Trump will then interpret in his own way and reroute, as we discussed yesterday. 21 Republican secretaries of state have sent a letter demanding immediate action to prevent non-citizens from registering and voting in American elections. The letter lays out critical improvements needed to the Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements program, SAVE. Oh, wow. Another punny name. Punny acronym. A federal system used to verify citizenship status is currently riddled with bureaucratic inefficiencies that hinder the detection of ineligible voters. The Republican officials argue that under the current system, states face cumbersome restrictions, outdated technology, and financial barriers that make it difficult to effectively detect and remove non-citizens from voter rolls. The letters being led by Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen and co-signed by top election officials from states including Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, blah, blah, blah. You can see the list there on your screen. No Florida, surprisingly. No Texas, surprisingly. But we do have Georgia. Brad Raffensperger signed on. Now, I'm sure that some of these people might be good, faithful, public servants. I have no reason to give them the benefit of the doubt and assume that, but just playing the odds, maybe a couple of them are. We don't know that to be true. They might just all be global communists with R's next to their name, just like we have global communists with D's next to their name. They pursue the same agenda together under the uniparty banner, different brands marketed to different groups of people. So they are calling on the federal government, a secretary of a department that should not exist, to help them fix problems with their elections in the states. Now, why are they taking that route? Well, the federal government has set up a number of laws, statutes that remove control of the elections from the states and give it instead to the federal government in their federal elections. And because of the abomination we have in our election system that has existed for a very long time, people, individuals voting for president and voting for senators, we have federal government involvement when elections should be determined in their place and manner by the states. So says the Constitution. Why don't the states just reclaim their power to control elections? Go to court over it. Remove everyone from your voter rolls and then build them up again. That's what has to happen. That is one of the baseline things that has to happen for legitimate elections to take place in the first place. One of the baseline things, the voter rolls must be purged completely and rebuilt from nothing. If people want to vote, they're going to have to register to vote. And I'm open to finding ways that will make it easier for people who actually are confined to their homes. But otherwise, just eliminate the whole thing. Then we don't have to worry about the motor voter problems. Trying to unwind the entire ball of yarn that has been created over hundreds of years now is ridiculous. It's not effective. It's not efficient. And it will not yield a good result, which is why people who want to keep the election system in place will pursue that route. And why people who grovel before the government, they believe the state is their authority. They believe the state holds power over them, that the power delegated to the state and then to the federal government is not an act of consent by the people. It's just the way things are. These are the government's powers. These are our powers. Our powers are what brand of soda we want to buy at the store. The federal government's power is to tell us whether or not we're allowed to access our money. It's crazy. The states can simply take that power back. And if it is to be challenged in court, well, by all means, challenge it in court. Take it all the way up to the Supreme Court. Let's get a ruling on these things, right? Going all the way back to the original Constitution, hopefully before that, but at least that far. And instead of doing that, these very based and red-pilled Republican secretaries of state in all these states are asking the federal government to do it for them. And so when that fails and doesn't solve the problem, even if Kristi Noem were going to take some sort of action here, and who knows if she will or won't, but even if she would do that, what difference would it make? The problem is more foundational than whatever this letter seeks to address. And it's more foundational than whatever Kristi Noem would be able to actually accomplish. So it's not an attempt at solving the problem, although it is very good marketing, because we hear over and over and over again that the real problem is voter ID. The real problem is not voter ID. The real problem is that our elections are fake and that we have an entirely, a totally absurd idea about our role relative to government and government's role relative to us. Until those fundamental problems, those foundational problems are solved, this stuff around the edges is not going to make any difference. Yes, it would be better if we could guarantee somehow that only the American people were voting in our elections, but this isn't going to accomplish that. This is just going to paper over the problem once again, as they always do. This is a marketing move by based and red-pilled Republicans in these so-called red states that will not solve the problem. And yet, people will cheer it on. Utah Money Mover says, have you ever looked into the Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence? I have not, but I am more than open to hearing more about it. Maggie in the chat put up the link to the states that have passed the Convention of States Article 5 application. Now, I'm personally not a fan or supporter of that. I wouldn't trust any of the people representing the states at an Article 5 convention, and I do not believe that the Constitution is even in effect at this point. So trying to fix things using the mechanics of a Constitution that is not in effect seems to me to be completely pointless. But even if I was to be convinced about the last part, I still would not be convinced that that would be the route to go in order to remedy these problems. Let us continue moving forward. This is Fox News from last night. McMahon on day one launches final mission to send education back to the states. So Linda McMahon was confirmed as the Secretary of the Department of Education in the totally fake and illegitimate false reality layer of our similarly fake and illegitimate government last night. In her first act as Secretary of Education, she is informing all employees of the Department of Education that she will lead a quote unquote momentous final mission to send education back to the states. She's sending a letter to all DOE is the Department of Energy, employees on Monday evening, informing them of a new era of accountability as she oversees President Donald Trump's promise to dissolve the department. Our job is to respect the will of the American people and the president they elected, who has tasked us with accomplishing the elimination of bureaucratic bloat here at the Department of Education, a momentous final mission, quickly and responsibly. The secretary said that the reconstruction of the department will profoundly impact staff, budgets, and agency operations. Under McMahon, the department will work from three base convictions, according to her letter: that parents are the primary decision makers in their children's education, that taxpayer-funded education should refocus on, quote, meaningful learning in math, reading, science, and history, not divisive DEI programs and gender ideology, and that post-secondary education should be a path to a well-paying career aligned with workforce needs. And, make of these priorities what you will. They're certainly better than the priorities in place right now. Parents being the primary decision makers in their children's education is first and foremost. Of course, I am totally open to public schools just being eliminated entirely. I do not think that the state should be any factor in deciding what children are learning, what they have to learn. And then the idea, of course, that parents couldn't just keep their kids out of school without then being punished by the state. At some point, I hope that we look at these things and think, oh, hey, that's obviously a crime against humanity. Removing red tape and bureaucratic barriers will empower parents to make the best educational choices for their children, the letter reads. An effective transfer of educational oversight to the states will mean more autonomy for local communities. Teachers, too, will benefit from less micromanagement in the classrooms, enabling them to get back to basics. And I guess we will see. Trump has stated that his goal is to immediately close the DOED, and that in the process, he wants McMahon to put herself out of a job. And we have covered that before on this here podcast. It seems like we are headed in that direction. A momentous final mission sounds like a great idea. Let us pause for just a second. We just talked about animal spirits. How about we talk about animal organs? In today's society, it's tough to be a man in a world dominated by overly masculine liberal women. That's just not how it's meant to be. Everywhere we look, it's gender neutral this product or made for her or that product. That is why we started a company that embodies the ethos of Men's Lives Matter too. It's a little grovelly, but okay. With products that aren't designed to be gender neutral or used by people with pronouns, our products at Rumble are designed and built for men by men, period. Minus the period. So if you struggle with low energy, mood swings, or hair loss, or if you need to be better at the gym, maybe in bed, and recover quicker after, and I assume they mean quality sleep, throw out all your other garbage supplements and try animal spirits. I mean, animal organs. They are traditionally the most nutrient-rich supplements on the planet, but our bison organs are a step above. The grass-fed, non-vaccinated bison are a species where the weak are allowed to die and only the strongest survive. That's the most red-pilled thing I've ever heard. So here is our commitment to you from men who have real confidence in their products. Try this today, and if you don't like it, fine. Return it for a refund. Go to BeNaked.com, code STUDIO, and get 15% off today. Be naked and have animal organs. That could get weird for whomever sees you naked, if that's what you get. Let us continue. Donald Trump posted today about schools, colleges, and universities, saying all federal funding will stop for any college, school, or university that allows illegal protests. Agitators will be imprisoned or permanently sent back to the country from which they came. American students will be permanently expelled or, depending on the crime, arrested. No masks. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, everybody is focused on this being about the quote-unquote Hamas protesters who were harassing Jewish students since the paragliding go-kart incident. And if you ask me, I would suggest that y'all go back and have a look at those protests, some of the footage coming out of them, who was reporting on those events, and decide for yourselves whether or not those things looked entirely real, or perhaps maybe they were partly staged. And you'll remember the based frat bros who were protecting the Jewish students, and then the very gay rendition of the statue of, I'm going to mess up the Iwo Jima statue. There was a meme that was going around for a little while in the based and red pill community of these young boys shirtless doing the same thing in like their little college shorts or whatever. There are a lot of gays in the conservative establishment, apparently. But anyhow, those look like totally staged protest events to make it seem as though there was a lot of hubbub back and forth about all of this. It was totally uncouth to suggest that the global regime proxy state of Israel, created about 75 years ago, and absolutely not the biblical Israel, could never be involved in such things as genocide, when of course they can. And this is seen in that light as being somehow protective of quote unquote anti-Semitic protests. Now, maybe it is. Maybe that was the motivation or initiation of all this, but it's not mentioned there by Donald Trump at all. And it's not like he's afraid of mentioning it. He talks about mask wearing in the protest. That would seem to be directly related to Antifa and Antifa style protesters and these Hamas protesters, etc. But he's also talked about removing federal funding from colleges, schools, and universities for mask mandates and for vaccine mandates. And of course, when the Department of Education goes away, what federal funding will there be to these schools and colleges and universities? And the answer is there should be none. There shouldn't be federal funding going to any of these states. If states want schools, the states can pay for schools. The federal government should be run and operated on the basis of what we take in tariffs. There will be no federal income tax. That would be preposterous. It is not constitutional. It's not moral. The state has no business in seizing the property of its citizens, or not even citizens, of its people. So what would be the source of federal funding at that point? There would be no more extraction of wealth, or the extraction of wealth to pay for the interest and the rental fees on the fiat currency created from nothing by the global regime bankers and then funneled through our government to those individuals, organizations, corporations, etc., who are going to implement the global regime agenda. And so that was really the program. It's not taxpayer money per se. It's just fiat currency created from nothing, funneled through the government, laundered essentially to the people implementing the agenda, the schools being a major factor in all of that, because of course you're getting the double whammy of them directly supporting the global regime agenda, but also in the process creating people who will themselves grow up and support the global regime agenda. Very good investment of totally fake money. When the federal funding of all these programs goes away and these departments go away, as Donald Trump seems to be well on the way to making happen, the problem is solved for itself. So people are concerned about free speech issues in the shutdown of protests, and that makes sense. Protesting is important. Speech is important. There shouldn't be any punishment whatsoever for speaking out against Jews or whites or blacks or anybody. These policies that are being pushed, to the extent these are being pushed by the conservative establishment, are just as woke as the policies that were pushed with the Biden-Kamala administration or people surrounding Obama or the celebrities out in Hollywood giving a standing ovation to Robert De Niro when he says F Trump. It's just wokeness on the other side. And it's funny, isn't it, that all of the strongest anti-wokes still totally support this thing? Check this out, actually. I saw this morning, and I wasn't thinking I would come back to it, but now that we're discussing this exact issue, I might as well highlight this guy over on Truth Social. He was one of the based and red-pilled influencers from the Epstein document op last week. DC Drano said there is a very big difference between peacefully protesting and organizing aggressive masked mobs to harass Jewish students, physically block them from going to class and occupying their classrooms. These are illegal acts and there is no constitutional right to engage in them, punish the offenders. Now, I can agree that there is no constitutional right for that aspect of it, but of course he's directing this for the protection of Jewish students. We can protect all people. There are already all sorts of laws in place to do that. And that's where it seems to me Trump's statement is operating. Are these colleges, as essentially just these little bastions of support for the global regime agenda and global philanthropist money as it floods through? Most of these colleges with their endowment funds have basically just set up their own hedge funds. They have all this money accumulated and they just use it to influence markets as hedge funds do. And so they kind of have their own internal policing and security, and they handle their issues internally. And they allow crimes like these to be committed, often against their own students and their own businesses, to the extent that these protests, again, are real at all. People are intimidated by them. and intimidated into silence. And I don't know if you've walked a college campus in the last few years. I have. I stopped by my old college, I don't know, 7, 8 months ago, 6 months ago, I don't know. And saw all over the place rainbow flags and little notices on taped, stapled into trees about how people were dealing with what might happen if Donald Trump were to win an election. Ridiculous stuff. All of that supported by that global money flowing through and their kind of independent little system that governs itself and sets its own rules. And apparently those days are ending. The federal funding is going to be cut one way or another. So it's a matter of how these things are explained to the public and how people will come to accept them. He's talked about the mask and vaccine mandates. Here he's talking about colleges and universities that support these violent and illegal protests. And I know that people have different opinions about that. Obviously, you know, if this is about protecting people from speech and about punishing the speech of others, if you're going to be against hate speech, you got to be against hate speech all the way around. DC Drano was against hate speech, but now he's not. Shocking, isn't it? There's also this that kind of caught my eye, and I don't want to spend a hell of a lot of time on it. This is the National Pulse from yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. Oh, no, this morning. Monsanto spends at state level to sidestep MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again agenda. The German-based pharmaceutical and biotechnology giant Bayer AG has ramped up its political spending at the state level in the United States, especially in Missouri, as it continues to fight thousands of lawsuits stemming from its acquisition of the infamous American biochemical company Monsanto. So all sorts of lawsuits being fought at the state level. There's an estimated 25,000 lawsuits pending in the state's Cole County alone. And you can read the details on all of that. Meanwhile, some Missouri lawmakers also see the legislation and the Bayer AG-backed media campaign as part of an effort to sideline any pushback from President Donald J. Trump's Make America Healthy Again movement, which is led by Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I strongly believe we shouldn't be granting major corporations special exemptions from the law, State Rep. Mazzie Christensen said in a statement to the National Pulse. She is a Republican. This reminds me of the Federal PrEP Act related to COVID-19 vaccines, which granted legal immunity to manufacturers, distributors, and administrators, leaving most lawsuits against vaccine manufacturers off the table. The Republican lawmaker notes that many countries around the world are moving to either limit or ban the use of glyphosate-based herbicides, including Roundup. But the point here to me is that they are beginning to address the states directly. And that was one of the concerns I expressed in November of last year when we began to see the formation of the fantasy team. Talked about it a little bit yesterday. It became immediately clear to me that the attempt would then be, as the federal government is dismantled, to take some of these agencies outside of the federal government. Okay, they're not going to be receiving federal government funding any longer. And that doesn't really matter from a top-down perspective, from the perspective of global governance and global banking, et cetera. The people who create the fiat currency do not actually need to funnel it through the government. That was the way to implement policies in the easiest fashion across the board before. But if these agencies are removed from the federal government, it doesn't mean that the states won't still listen to the CDC. California is going to go along with CDC policies, whether the CDC is part of the federal government or not. You could create a CDC or an FDA or whatever outside of the federal government, funnel all the money through there from the pharmaceutical companies to get their drugs approved. And then a state that is still totally on board with the global regime agenda will say, these are the CDC recommendations, and we are going to follow them. Trust the experts, trust the science. They don't need the imprimatur of the federal government. They don't need the quasi-legal force of the federal government to implement any of this stuff. They can do it at the state level if they want. And I would suggest that the corporations and organizations like these, global government, transnational corporations, are going to continue pushing their agenda forward through these quasi-governmental organizations now outside the federal government, operating as, independent think tanks or whatever. They'll still be making the same amount of money. They'll still have the same influence in a kind of public perception sort of way. And they'll still be able to influence policy. And what else do you need them for? Do you need them to be part of the federal government? Do you trust the CDC more if it's under the federal government or not? And I don't mean, obviously, any of you. I would suspect that all of you have stopped trusting the CDC and all of these organizations probably a long time ago. But the people who put 2 masks on to get in the car don't care whether the CDC is part of the federal government or not. In fact, it'll probably be pitched to them that the CDC is even more reliable without the influence of government. It has now been privatized, so now it has some sort of profit motive, or it's going to be more accountable to the people who fund it. They're going to stop funding it if they get things wrong. No, they're not. They fund it specifically to get things wrong. They do that whether it's under the government or not. And so it's ultimately going to be a matter of whether or not the people themselves are going to trust the experts and trust the science, and then allow their local governments and their state governments to implement the policies handed down from on high by the global regime through these organizations. And this might come off as counterintuitive after hearing about how these are efforts to sidestep MAGA, or MAHA, or MAHA, or whatever, etc. But this is better. The people are going to have to learn that the action has to come at the local level and the state level. That's where the even the public communications have to be directed in that way, toward local, toward state, rather than the federal government soap opera that plays out nonstop. Why are we paying attention to what someone like J.D. Vance is doing every day? He's not president. And this isn't an anti-J.D. Vance thing. Why are we paying attention to what the congressmen are doing? The way the government is actually set up, if the people would force it to run that way, is that our local governments are what are controlling the community around us. If you don't want your school to be putting these kinds of mandates in place, the people in the area need to be convinced, or they need to pull their kids out of school and deal with the consequences. And they would say, well, the consequences are the state's going to try to take our kids away, which is a very severe consequence. And should also tell everybody, well, the state has way too much power. What are you going to do about that? How are you going to perceive these things? Are you just going to continue to grovel and allow the state to have that sort of power, or not? And now I understand that this particular issue that we're discussing doesn't affect me personally in terms of taking kids out of school. I know that that's a very, very difficult subject for families who have both parents working or only have one parent in the home. Okay, so I get that stuff. But it's a matter of how much of this we're going to take. And if we keep waiting for our solutions to come down from a totally illegitimate government that by rights shouldn't have any control over these policies to begin with, then we're going to be waiting an awful long time. And we're going to be groveling and dealing with all of the problems caused by that while we wait. And the problems aren't going to get better, because what we're going to have are solutions like the one we just talked about a few minutes ago with the Department of Homeland Security and these Republican secretaries of state suggesting that somehow their solutions are up there on that level. All right. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to switch to this Rumble Premium thing and see how that goes. Actually, you know what? Let's do just some notes on some of this constitutional stuff, and then we'll go to Rumble Premium to deal with the geopolitical stuff and the Ukraine of it all, because there's obviously some more interesting stuff, and we'll do that through the last 45 minutes or an hour. So we were talking yesterday about the significance of that March 4th date, the date of the original inauguration, and what was supposed to be the date that our country's government would begin under the Constitution, March 4th of 1789. And also, by the way, if you are watching or listening on Rumble, it would be wonderful if you could go ahead and hit that thumbs up. That will probably help the show potentially appear on the leaderboards. It's probably unlikely that this show is going to do that right now, as we've just kind of started the live stream a couple of months ago, and it's still in its early stages of growth. But it always does help in terms of the rankings on Rumble. And hey, do it on YouTube if you're on there as well. So let's get into some of the March 4th stuff. This is from Senate.gov. The significance of March 4th. At New York City's Federal Hall on March 4th, 1789, the Senate convened for the first time. From 1789 until 1933, when the Constitution's 20th Amendment changed the convening time to 12 noon on January 3rd. The date of March 4th would rank among the most important on the congressional calendar. As the Constitution's framers had no way of knowing when the new Constitution would be approved, they directed the Congress under the expiring Articles of Confederation to set the convening date. Very interesting. In September 1788, once the necessary 9 states had ratified, the Confederation Congress chose March 4th. Now, the Articles of Confederation themselves, as I mentioned yesterday, were supposed to have approval from all 13 states to ratify any changes whatsoever. But that was too strict for the people that wanted to change government over. So instead, they just overturned the Articles of Confederation and replaced them with a document that was much more amenable to the needs of the global regime and its bankers and people who are now called, for whatever reason, Federalists, like Alexander Hamilton. In the years that followed 1789, March 4th became most significant as an ending date. Although the Senate customarily convened on the 4th of March every 4 years for a few days to consider nominations of new presidential administrations, the Senate and the House would not again come together on March 4th until 1867. While Congress followed the constitutional requirement to convene annually on the first Monday in December, it almost always adjourned its final session on March 4th. As early 19th century members approached a final session's crucial closing minutes, they regularly questioned whether the Congress expired at midnight on March 3rd or noon on March 4th. Surprisingly, this fundamental point remained unsettled for decades. Finally, at midnight on March 3rd, 1851, Mississippi Senator Jefferson Davis declared that his term had expired and refused to vote when further roll calls were ordered. This sparked a discussion of the difference between a natural day beginning at midnight and a political day starting at noon. The Senate then adopted a resolution stating its opinion that, as the Senate customarily convened at noon on March 4th, the previous Congress must end at that time. Whether at midnight or noon, the Senate often gained extra time for last-minute appropriations bills by sending a doorkeeper, pole in hand, to gently move the chamber clock's minute hand, from natural time to political time. Very, very interesting, and particularly interesting about how the Congress would expire at midnight on March 3rd, we're talking often about whether or not the constitutional republic is being restored. And last night at midnight on March 3rd, the first seconds of March 4th, the tariffs went into effect. Many of us believe that Donald Trump is returning the country, the nation, however you want to describe it, the federation, the confederation, to its prior form. And there are those who think that that just happened last night at midnight. I think it's an interesting argument. I guess we'll see as the future emerges. It's just one of those plausible possibilities that we keep in our minds. Is there enough to say, yes, this is definitely happening? In my estimation, the answer to that question is no. But it doesn't mean that we don't continue to explore the possibility. Whereas the normie mind would immediately say, if that was happening, the TV would have told us. That's definitely not happening. Okay, normie, did you look into it? No. And they would even admit, no. Why didn't you look into it? How do you know it's not happening if you didn't look into it? Well, that's stupid. All the dumbest explanations you could possibly find for the rejection of an idea that has never been explored by these people. But they're the sort of people that do that. And that, my friends, is how you end up wearing 2 masks in your car to protect you from a disease that can't kill you with masks that can't protect you. But at least you got 2 of them. It may catch a stray droplet. Now I made Anthony Fauci sound sort of British as well. Whatever. Let's see what else Rumble has for us. Should we talk about coffee again? Let's talk about coffee again. I love coffee. You love coffee. Rumble loves coffee. Rumble has their proprietary coffee brand. The CEO of Rumble, Chris Pavlovski, recently released an email from Inspire Brands and Dunkin' Donuts. The email explicitly states that the right-wing culture of Rumble is too polarizing. Oh, no. In other words, Dunkin' Donuts has a problem with right-wing culture and wants nothing to do with it or Rumble. And truth be told, people don't really know what right-wing culture even is. We're just supposed to pretend that Ben Shapiro is right-wing. Ben Shapiro is a global communist. He is a neoconservative. Neoconservatism is an outgrowth of Trotsky. He is a direct ideological descendant of Trotsky. And guess who else were ideological descendants of Trotsky? Well, those Nazis that Ben Shapiro always talks about. So here's the solution. Stop buying products that don't support you and start supporting brands that support you. The competing coffee brand that we all need to get behind is Rumble's 1775 coffee. For a limited time, Rumble is offering buy 2 bags of coffee and get 1 for free. Go to 1775coffee.com and enter promo code Duncan to get this limited time deal. And I hope you all are fortified by the thought of Rumble coffee. Let us continue with our prior subject. Now, I'm not going to go all the way through this piece right here, but this is another piece from the White House Historical Association. And again, this is the David Rubenstein linked organization, but an article called Not a Ragged Mob, the Inauguration of 1829. And so this is the inauguration of one Andrew Jackson, the man who fought the central banks, the man who Donald Trump seems to admire a great deal. Let us go to the Wikipedia entry on the inauguration of Andrew Jackson. The first inauguration of Andrew Jackson as the 7th president of the United States was held on Wednesday, March 4th, 1829, at the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. So a significant date, 40 years past the original significant March 4th date. The inauguration marked the commencement of the first four-year term of Andrew Jackson as president and the second term of John C. Calhoun as vice president. Chief Justice John Marshall administered the presidential oath of office. Calhoun resigned 3 years, 299 days into this term, and the office remained vacant for the balance of it. Before ratification of the 25th Amendment in 1967, no constitutional provision existed for filling an intra-term vacancy in the vice presidency. Outgoing President John Quincy Adams, whom Jackson defeated in the 1828 election, did not attend the inauguration due to tensions between them. So another Trump-linked idea. Making this the second time an outgoing president skipped the inauguration of his successor, after his father, John Adams, skipped the 1801 inauguration of Thomas Jefferson. And John Adams, of course, by the end, was a regime-supporting globalist. He had moved to a mansion on Meridian Hill in February 1829 and officially left the White House on the evening of March 3rd, the day before the inauguration. So the Adams family were not, not that Adams family, were not fans, apparently, of showing up for the inaugurations of presidents they did not believe were suitably regime-oriented. It's almost like that family were just tools of the global bankers. Crazy, huh? Can't imagine it. The inauguration itself took place on March 4th, 1829, and was the first time in which the ceremony was held on the east portico of the United States Capitol. 10,000 people arrived in town for the ceremony, eliciting this response from Francis Scott Key: "It's beautiful. It is sublime." Okay. By 10 a.m., the area in front of the Capitol was filled with people, and the stairs on the east portico were blocked by a ship's cable to prevent the crowd from advancing. An excited crowd of roughly 21,000 came to see the swearing in, even if most would not be able to hear the inaugural address. Jackson came on foot to the ceremony, but to avoid the multitude, he used a basement door on the west front to enter the Capitol. Upon exiting to face the crowd, he bowed to great cheers. The scene was described by a witness: "Never can I forget the spectacle which presented itself on every side, nor the electrifying moment when the eager, expectant eyes of that vast and motley multitude caught sight of the tall and imposing form of their adored leader as he came forth between the columns of the portico. The color of the whole mass changed as if by miracle. All hats were off at once, and the dark tint which usually pervades a mixed map of men was turned, as by a magic wand, into the bright hue of 10,000 upturned and expectant human faces, radiant with sudden joy. The peal of shouting that arose rent the air and seemed to shake the very ground. But when the Chief Justice took his place and commenced the brief ceremony of administering the oath of office, it quickly sank into comparative silence. And as the new president proceeded to read his inaugural address, the stillness gradually increased. But all efforts to hear him beyond a brief space immediately around were utterly vain. That was some wonderful language and reading. Now, the rest of the story goes that a great mob filled the White House for the inaugural. The White House was opened to all for a post-inaugural reception and was filled by the public even before Jackson arrived on horseback. Soon afterward, Jackson left by a window or a side entrance and proceeded to Gadsby's, later called the National Hotel. And all of this is just the mythology of the date. There's some disagreement about whether some of these events actually happened. The crowd continued to descend into a drunken mob, only dispersed when the bowls of liquor and punch were placed on the front lawn of the White House. You just take the alcohol outside and everybody leaves the party. True. I never saw such a mixture, said Joseph Story, then a justice of the Supreme Court. The reign of King Mob seemed triumphant. the White House was left a mess, including several $1,000s worth of broken china. That night, an inaugural ball for administration officials in Washington's high society was held in Carusi's assembly rooms, and then they note at the end, another ball was held in the Central Masonic Hall. Let's have a celebration in this town that is built to resemble an owl at the Grand Masonic Hall. Let me see if I can find a quick image of that. I don't generally expect that my audience will be full of normies who have never seen these things. And I generally do expect that my audience will be filled with people who have probably researched these things even better than I have. But hey, you never know, so we might as well share. Look at that. How about that layout of the DC Capitol? I wonder if they meant to do that. What's that weird obelisk thing? Oh, we can't insult the obelisk. We can't point out the obelisk that also exists in the city of London and the Vatican and was put there by the penis worship cult of Kabbalists that have controlled the world for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Can't point that out. That is a conspiracy theory until they admit it. That's what's required for evidence. Until you have the side responsible for the supposed conspiracy admit, yeah, you got us. We are definitely penis worshipers. Our whole thing is about worshiping the penis. And, we can go down dark roads with that. Until they admit that's what they're doing, we're not allowed to believe it. Where do all these ideas come from? The Talmud. They come from the Talmud. Constitutional amendments. Amendment 20, date changes for the presidency, Congress, and succession. If I could only speak. This article from the ReaganLibrary.gov. Just wanted to jump down here to the end. The prevailing setback for having a 4-month delay between the November elections and the March inauguration period was the inability to take action in times of crisis. Both Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 and that of Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932 were faced with two major national crises, the beginning of the American Civil War and the Great Depression. Were both of those events caused by the global regime and its bankers? Yes. Was that Civil War that Abraham Lincoln was dealing with, was that about overthrowing the original Constitution and replacing it with an inverted form of that Constitution, replacing our constitutional republic with our democracy, replacing the focus on individual liberty with equality among people, and replacing the focus on the good of the individual with the good of the state or the nation? Yes. And it's not my argument. That is the argument of one George P. Fletcher, a Columbia Law School professor and constitutional authority, who also happens to be a globalist, a Zionist, and a leftist. His book, Our Secret Constitution, argues that the Reconstruction Amendments were the purpose of fighting the Civil War, and that the purpose of the Reconstruction Amendments were to overthrow the Constitution and install a second Constitution that he calls Our Secret Constitution. And he believes Abraham Lincoln is a hero for overthrowing our original Constitution. And let's just close this out here. In the addition to the key changes to the waiting period between the election and inauguration, the 20th Amendment determined that if the president-elect dies or is otherwise incapacitated before they are inaugurated, the vice president-elect takes up the now vacant role and serves for the full 4-year term. If there is no president-elect before Inauguration Day, the 20th Amendment allows the vice president-elect to act in that role until a new one can be appointed by Congress. The congressional authority to select a president and vice president is divided respectively between the House of Representatives and the Senate. While the Congress has never had to enact this statute, this segment of the 20th Amendment was designed to eliminate any possibility of a constitutional succession crisis, such as those faced in the elections of 1800 and 1876. The 20th Amendment's provisions were each set to take place at different times after it was ratified, making the 74th Congress the first one to use the new calendar dates for inauguration on January 3rd, 1935. In a coincidental incident regarding the new provisions for succession, President-elect Franklin D. Roosevelt was targeted for assassination on February 15th, 1933, which is weird because he did such a good job in installing the global communist government that we maintain to this very day. Let's do one more ad, and then we're going to get into the geopolitics of it all. And this ad, I guess, is going to be later. It just told me I can't do it. All right, so let's switch over then, and we will go to Rumble Premium and local supporters. I am not sure whether or not this is going to boot people off of other platforms like YouTube or Substack. If you get booted, you're more than welcome to go give a look over there. But I have to try this, so let's do it. And I guess now we're just still continuing in a different land. And who knows how this will affect things. You guys can give me your feedback, as always, on the changes that we make to how things operate around here. It is ultimately an important aspect of all this that my audience actually enjoys the show, and that these various changes that I make due to attempting at least to pay the bills are not disruptive to people's enjoyment. So let's go to the geopolitical front. We're going to talk about Ukraine, but before we get all the way there, and this is, Ukraine related, Sputnik, the Russian state media that operates throughout Africa and other places, and some of their feeds are banned here in the United States, as Russia Today's are as well. They did an interview with the grandson of the famous Charles de Gaulle of France. His grandson's name is Pierre de Gaulle. And these interviews, of course, are in French. I'm going to try to keep the volume on these at a reasonable level so that I can read the subtitles of this speech, because of his answers, I should say, because I find them very interesting.
Je ne crois pas du tout en l'armée européenne. Mon grand-père n'y croyait pas non plus.
Hold on. He's going a little too fast there. Let's slow this down so that I don't actually make it impossible for myself to follow along. He says, I don't believe in the European army at all.
Je ne crois pas du tout en l'armée européenne.
My grandfather didn't believe in it either. You can't imagine Germans or English or Swedes fighting for France as they would fight for their own country. It doesn't work. It's a European technocratic idea that actually aims to dissolve the spirit of the nation, the spirit of the people, their ability to defend themselves in a kind of union, I would say more or less clear, where everyone merges into a European space. And so the exercise is to dissolve, I would say, each country into the kind of huge market that is ultimately subject to Anglo-Saxon rules. There are no more national capabilities. There is no more national defense. And the interests of each country are not respected. Sending European troops to Ukraine is a considerable stupidity. because these are European troops, NATO troops, which, if they were fighting under their own flag with their own uniform, would actually be considered an aggression or a possibility of direct aggression by these European countries against Russia. President Putin said that he has no intention of invading Europe or even Ukraine, that it would be an aberration. Besides, it is absolutely not in the interest of the Russians or all of these countries to be integrated into the command of NATO, which means they are under American command. So the idea of creating a European army that would be independent, that would play an independent role in Ukraine, is a hoax. This is false. This is another use and manipulation of the Europeans and the member countries, whoever they are. It is a manipulation of the French to make people believe that the European army, which is a utopia, is autonomous with autonomous countries to defend their own interests. It is wrong. It is a lie. Now, that's very bold. It's particularly so in light of the comments we heard yesterday from Viktor Orban, talking about how his goals were to protect Hungary first, and that all the other European leaders should be there with their interests to protect their countries first. We talked yesterday at the end of the show about what sort of argument could be made to Normie MAGA, to the Uniparty right in general, and maybe to people who have traditionally supported the Uniparty left. What argument could you make to them that would convince them that Russia was good or that Putin was good? And we don't need to go so far as to convince them that Russia or Putin are good. They may well be, they may not be. But regardless, the only argument is the same argument we make here. Americans should be for America first. American policy should be designed to protect the American people and look after American interests. And Russians, of course, would have the same designs on how their country should be run. To the extent that Vladimir Putin has done a better job of that than any American leader outside of Donald Trump has in decades or centuries, then Russia would actually be ahead of us on the project of resisting that global regime and helping to defeat that global regime, collapsing their apparatus of control worldwide. So we hear the same from Pierre de Gaulle, grandson of Charles de Gaulle. He's talking about how there should be no European army. The entire notion is fanciful. It's ridiculous. It is anti-European. It is anti the interests of these nations. It is some ridiculous utopia, as he describes. Not that they would actually be able to field an army in the first place or fund the creation of an army in the first place, though they're talking about that today. German leaders are talking about that. The leaders in the UK are talking about that. I think it was Ursula von der Leyen. I don't want to misstate this, so please check me if I'm wrong, but I believe she was saying that their motivation should be toward armament at this point. They actually need to figure out a way to protect Europe because they can't, not without American help, which means that they are totally vulnerable. If indeed Russia wanted to conquer Europe, and of course Russia does not want to conquer Europe. There's no reason to believe that Russia does want to conquer Europe. Let's continue. There is another clip from de Gaulle in that interview where he's speaking directly about Ukraine. And I will do my best again to make this work out. I hope you were able to hear me and kind of get some sense of his inflection when he was speaking. He says, let's go ahead and start that over again. He said, President Zelensky, well, he hasn't been president since last May. He said, well, give BlackRock a mandate at the end of December 2022 to rebuild their own country. Zelensky has been selling his own country for a very long time. 50% of the agricultural land, he says, is the size of Italy now. Rare earth, there's nothing left. It's a country that unfortunately will be divided between a part, I would say truly Ukrainian, although the Poles will also want to recover a bit, a part that would be a kind of political and economic no man's land, which is funny because Ukraine is meant to be the boundary land of Russia. It's the outside lands without military occupation, and a Russian part composed of populations that are entirely Russophile. So there is no Ukraine anymore. Do they tell you that on the TV, that there's no Ukraine anymore? I'm pretty sure I've been saying that for the last 3 years. I'm not sure that others have been. Maybe some others have been. But how can you know that there will not be a Ukraine anymore at any point over the last few years if you are getting your information from the mainstream? If you are reading mainstream newspapers and believing them, if you are listening to politicians of the Uniparty and believing them, and even listening to Donald Trump as he talks about, as he kind of has to grab hold of these narratives before he can redirect them. He has to go along with the central narrative, understanding that 80 or 90% of the country is going to believe whatever the television has said, whether it's through the TV screen or through a newspaper, through the computer, through your phone. Whatever it is, Donald Trump understands and has to incorporate the understanding that basically everybody's going to believe that bullshit. Okay? But I don't have those boundaries. I'm not restricted by what people are going to believe. I'm going to say what I think I perceive to be true, and we'll just let the chips fall where they may. And so I've been saying for 3 years, Ukraine's not a country. Volodymyr Zelensky's a comedic actor. There might not even be any kind of war happening. Anything we are seeing about a war is probably stuff that's happened before, from 2014. And here we are now. There's not going to be any Ukraine. The Poles are going to take part of it. And it's worth noting that when they talk about these European leaders, whenever they have the Polish involved, it's always Donald Tusk, the Polish prime minister. But the Polish prime minister is not the actual leader of Poland. It's their president. His name, Andrzej Duda. He's a friend of Trump's who came and visited Trump during the pause term, the devolution term, the administration of the fake and illegitimate president, Joe Biden. They're just showing the shadow government leader of Poland and pretending that he's the real leader of Poland and can make important decisions about what Poland is going to do. But he can't. He's basically just the Polish Nancy Pelosi. And speaking of that, you might remember Nancy Pelosi visiting places like Taiwan, acting as though she was somehow the head of state. Here she is. Just want to show Nancy. Look at that. They all arrived in their masks. This was in 2022, August 3rd of 2022, and they're still in masks. Isn't that incredible? That's an old trip. No more Nancy pictures in this? What gives? Let's get another Nancy picture. In fact, let's get only Nancy pictures. How about this right here? What a picture. These are the very special N95 masks right here and right here. And maybe right there, but I don't think so. So these masks don't work less than the other two masks, which don't work at all. So the N95 masks don't work, but at least they are closer to working than the other masks that absolutely don't work at all. That's what we were led to believe. Hey, you might as well wear this important mask. It's closer to working. Pausing for a second, Real Purdy in the chat with a Rumble rant, $50. Thank you very much, by the way. Thanks for kicking so much ass, Chris. I'd be bonkers dumb trying to navigate this war without hearing your smart takes. Well, that is very kind. And I don't think you'd be that dumb because you are doing this and not watching Fox News and MSNBC. So you got this, Real Purdy. Andy Artist, $20, jumped from Getter to here. Love your shows. Well, thank you for making the leap on over. And thank you for watching on Getter. I don't talk about that much, but actually the show does stream on Getter. And Getter is a great social media app. The technology is actually really good. It doesn't have the kind of cachet of some of the other social media apps because a lot of people are not on there and there's not a ton of activity, but it is a very good app. And the people, the Steve Bannon circle, they're involved with the whole Getter thing. Let's take another pause, and we will do this Truth Social ad just quickly while we're talking about social media, because Truth Social is one of my key social media platforms. It's basically Telegram #1, Truth Social #2, everything else behind that. If you're looking for a great place online for news, discussion, and entertainment, then check out Truth Social, Donald Trump's social media website. You'll get breaking news stories and commentary from top media figures. If you want to see Trump's legendary Truth Social posts, then get on Truth Social today. Join a growing community of patriots on a free speech platform designed to avoid censorship and cancellation by big tech. Make your voice heard. Join the movement. Join Truth Social. And you can find me over on Truth Social at I'm Your Moderator, just like everywhere. And by the way, if you guys have abandoned YouTube or not, follow on YouTube, because you never know where things will be, what will be up, what will be down. I'm your moderator on all of these platforms. Let us continue on. So no sooner does Pierre de Gaulle say these nasty things about Ukraine, they just don't have a country left. Zelensky is robbing the country. Their land, the size of Italy, is being reduced, and the rare earth minerals are already gone. How about that? Could Donald Trump just be hoodwinking the regime about these rare earth minerals, making people look at them and for them? What's going on there? Is de Gaulle trying to subvert or undermine this potential deal for the peace? I've been saying for a long time, Volodymyr Zelensky, the comedic actor, he is under control by somebody. And I would suggest that the net effect of his actions are that the whole hoax happening in Ukraine is being exposed for a massive fraud against the world, a massive crime against humanity. The corruption is being exposed, the bioweapons labs, the weapons trafficking, the human trafficking, the drug trafficking, the corruption, financial crime, everything else, right there in the seat of the Khazarian mafia. All of that is being exposed to the world, and Volodymyr Zelensky is leading the way in doing that. So whether he is an enemy or a friend or just a guy that's under control, having been an enemy and now is just a puppet from our side rather than a puppet from their side, he's doing a great job in waking the world up to exactly what's happening there and teaching a lot of lessons to the world about what Nazis are. All very interesting. So Pierre de Gaulle goes after this, and then we get, within 24 hours, from the global mouthpiece, the Financial Times, de Gaulle grandson veers off the statesman's track. This was from just today. And I'll just do the beginning here, and then we'll jump down to the end, because the end is kind of funny. It shouldn't come as a complete surprise that General Charles de Gaulle's youngest grandson has denounced the U.S., condemned NATO, vilified Ukraine, and spoken up for Russian President Vladimir Putin. Very based. His grandfather, the greatest French statesman of the 20th century, plowed a proudly independent furrow in foreign policy. The case of Pierre de Gaulle illustrates the tendency for the progeny of famous leaders to adopt political views that echo their forebears, but are distinctly more extreme. Pierre de Gaulle aired his controversial views on the Ukrainian president in an interview with Le Parisien, a French newspaper, saying the West had, quote, unfortunately let Zelensky, his oligarchs, and neo-Nazi military groups lock themselves into a spiral of war. Other de Gaulle family members rejected his analysis of Russia's invasion, insisting the late Second World War hero and president certainly would not have shared it. Ructions are not new to the de Gaulle family. In 1999, another grandson, Charles, was elected to the European Parliament for the far-right National Front. So, of course, they tell us, as they always do, that the family members of this person would have hated what they were doing. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was subject to the same sort of attacks over the last couple of years, people declaring that he would have been a disgrace in the eyes of his own father. The media gets to determine that. The global regime gets to determine that. Anybody who disagrees, even within the Kennedy family, gets to determine that, because Robert F. Kennedy was not there to speak for himself, so they can all speak on his behalf against his son. Isn't that deranged and totally immoral? I would think so. But hey, skipping down to the end. And they are going through now that the progeny of these former greats or former villains can turn out the opposite. And that's what's happening here. You could never be so bold as to insult Charles de Gaulle, but you can go after his grandsons, assuming that you're doing so in his name. That is totally above board. Now we have Russian politician Vyacheslav Nikonov determined to outdo the fanaticism of his grandfather, Vyacheslav Molotov, Joseph Stalin's henchman. Molotov had blood on his hands during Stalin's reign of terror, and he signed the 1939 pact with the Nazis that carved up Eastern Europe on the outbreak of the Second World War. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Nikonov denounced the West in terms at least as fierce as his grandfather's. The bloc of imperialist states will not be complete until it coincides with the Hitler coalition. We're talking about the Fourth Reich. Kind of amazing, isn't it? The UK offers a disreputable rather than fanatical example of rogue offspring, Mark Thatcher, son of former Premier Margaret Thatcher. I'm falling into, after 2 hours, I guess I cannot read anymore. Received a suspended prison sentence in South Africa in 2005 after unwittingly helping finance a coup attempt in Equatorial Guinea. The common thread is for scions of illustrious or notorious leaders to struggle to find their own path. Weighed down by the burden of family greatness, these restless spirits can strike out in reckless directions. It does not have to be this way. To take just two of many contrasting examples, Stalin's daughter, Svetlana, and Ferdinand von Schirach, grandson of the head of the Hitler Youth Movement, were honorable people. See that? You can lead the Hitler Youth, and just 2 generations later, the same global regime can still like you, according to Tony Barber at the Financial Times. For the wayward ones, he says, their actions and views rest on their own consciences. Let us move forward. Now, we noted last week in our discussion of the comedic actors meeting at the White House with Donald J. Trump, his journey to America, this great television, as Donald Trump called it, that they talked about the status of Ukrainian cities. Here we are.
It doesn't matter. Do you have ocean or not? Your soldiers will fight.
Mr. President, would you be willing to visit Ukraine, maybe Kyiv or Odessa, which is going to be a third year of the Black Sea?
It was my question.
Sorry.
I don't want to talk about Odessa now. Let's not talk about Odessa. I want to talk about making a deal, getting peace. We don't have to talk about Odessa, but a lot of cities have been destroyed. A lot of cities that are not recognizable. There's not a building standing.
No.
And a lot of
things
have
President, you have to come and to look. No. We have very good cities. Yes, a lot of things have been destroyed, but mostly cities alive and people work and children go to school. Sometimes it's very difficult. Sometimes closer to front line, children have to go to underground schools or online, but we live Ukraine is fighting and Ukraine lives. This is very important. And maybe it's Putin is sharing this information that he destroyed us. No, he lost 700,000 people. 700,000.
And so we get the claims about the number of deaths, and Donald Trump has inflated those death numbers as well. I saw this morning, and be warned, it is not necessarily true, okay? This is a video from a nightclub. I am not familiar with the nightclub scene in Europe, and particularly in Odessa, in a place that they refer to as Ukraine. But this is supposedly what's happening at clubs in Odessa in February of 2025. And it would not surprise me at all. We have seen claims like this throughout the last few years about how Ukraine is basically fine. Young people partying in very ritzy, expensive locations. This is very similar to what you would have seen in a Los Angeles nightclub at any point in the last 25 years. Is this Odessa, Ukraine? This girl's getting filmed a lot. They don't seem to be dodging bombs. Now, I don't know if that is authentic video from a real club that exists in Ukraine or not. But again, we've seen videos like that many times over the years. I would suspect, like if I was to have to bet on this, I would suspect that they probably just got this clip from the social media account of a person who goes to these parties or throws these parties. That would not surprise me in the least. And it comports with what the fake president, the comedic actor from Ukraine, just said. The cities actually aren't destroyed. Donald Trump calls them destroyed all the time. Maybe he's just repeating Russian disinformation, as Zelensky suggested. But I suspect that the cities are actually just fine, and that Trump is just going along with the central narrative on the war in Ukraine for now, while it is redirected and routed off course in terms of what the regime had intended there. Very interesting if that's the case. Should we really be sending them money? Should we be sending them troops? Does Europe need to pretend to create an army to defend the Ukraine if what we actually have there are young people partying their asses off? This is from Bloomberg. Yesterday, we talked about how the threat, by the time the afternoon was rolling on, by the time the show wrapped up, the new threat was for Trump to cut off aid from Ukraine. I suggested this is the next phase in the narrative rollout of the quote unquote Ukraine war. This is Bloomberg, as I said. Trump pauses military aid to Ukraine after clash with Zelensky. President Donald Trump ordered a pause to all U.S. military aid to Ukraine, turning up the heat on Volodymyr Zelensky days after an Oval Office blowup with the Ukrainian president left support from his country's most important ally in doubt. The U.S. is holding up all pending military assistance until Trump determines Ukraine's leaders demonstrate a good faith commitment to peace, according to a senior Defense Department official who asked not to be identified, discussing private deliberations. So apparently we still have leaks in the Defense Department, or these are intentional leaks. The administration will also review the aid to make sure it's contributing to a solution to the conflict, a White House official said. And that is like a bare minimum standard you would think that they would have to meet. The order applies to all U.S. military equipment not currently in Ukraine, including weapons in transit on aircraft and ships or waiting in transit areas in Poland. While the extent of the affected weapons isn't immediately known, Trump had inherited from former President Joe Biden the authority to deliver $3.85 billion in weapons from U.S. stockpiles. And I'm sure he is just overwhelmingly grateful for the authority having been delivered by the fake and illegitimate President Joe Biden. Trump is eager for a quick deal to end the war triggered by Russia's full-scale invasion of its neighbor 3 years ago. But when Zelensky pushed last week for security guarantees to ensure Russia doesn't violate any agreement, Trump angrily told him to come back when he's ready for peace. A mineral resources deal that was seen as a possible precursor to a ceasefire was left unsigned. And I thought there was something back toward the end, but perhaps not. Let's leave that one there, and we will move forward to Reuters from today. And now it says it's updated 2 hours ago, so hopefully they didn't mess up any of my stuff. U.S. and Ukraine to sign minerals deal, sources say. Zelensky pledges to make things right. We're going to get to Zelensky's apology in just a moment. Trump told advisors he wants to announce the agreement in a major address he will give to Congress this evening, 3 of the sources said. They cautioned that the deal had yet to be signed and the situation could change. So now we've been going through weeks on end of the deal being off, the deal being on, the deal being off, the deal being on, back and forth, over and over. The pause in American aid puts more pressure on European allies who have publicly embraced Zelensky since the Oval Office blow-up. Britain and France, whose leaders both visited the White House last week, have offered troops to help guard a potential ceasefire. Europeans are racing to boost their own military spending. And again, that's not going to matter at all. The chances of them actually creating a European army are nil, as was just reinforced a moment ago by Pierre de Gaulle. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen unveiled proposals to mobilize up to 800 billion euros, that's $840 billion, for EU defense spending. The 27-nation bloc holds an emergency summit on Thursday. That would be extraordinary. Nearly $1 trillion they're going to pay in defense spending, having spent virtually nothing for decades as the United States defends them. Are they just going to print all of that and then attempt to pin it on the American people? Maybe through the unipartisan compromise budget resolution? We shall see. France's Prime Minister François Bayrou was sharply critical of Trump's move. Suspending aid during a war to a country under attack means abandoning the country under attack and accepting or hoping that the aggressor will win, he said. And upon listening to that, just got to remember, suspending aid to a country under a war, how dare you? Ukrainians were stunned, and many described Washington's move as a betrayal. Oleksandr Mereshko, head of the European, that's what European and Ukrainian together sounds like. Head of the Ukrainian Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee said it looked like Trump was, quote, pushing us toward capitulation. Yes, it is a betrayal. Let's call it like it is, said lawyer Olena Belova, 47, in Kyiv. But let's hope that American civil society and the elites of the European Union will not leave us alone. So they just called up some random lawyer and were like, hey, will you please say that Donald Trump has betrayed you? I mean, you can call up basically any lawyer and get them to say Donald Trump has betrayed them. There are some base lawyers. I'm just kidding. Sorry, base lawyers. I know there's like 8 of you. Can't wait till the what is it? British accreditation registry goes down. All of the pillars of the global regime are collapsing around them. It's very sad. Very sad. Live long and prosper, global regime. Slava global regime. These people, man. Let us go to none other than the Badlands Media website. Badlandsmedia.tv Zelensky calls Oval Office meeting with Trump regrettable. Says Ukraine is ready to negotiate. And he posted this on X, formerly Twitter. I would like to reiterate Ukraine's commitment to peace. That was not half bad. I'm going to say that was not half bad. I'm not going to read his whole tweet like that because I'm not really totally on board with the Zelensky impression yet. And I guess, I'm going to have to gauge people's reactions to that one. It was a little rough. I'm not great on my accents today. I didn't even do the Ben Shapiro. I could do a Ben Shapiro bit because he declared today that the new op is to have Donald Trump pardon Derek Chauvin, the police officer that we were told was imprisoned after a real trial following the George Floyd psyop that people still to this day believe was started by a video showing a police officer named Derek Chauvin choking out a black man named George Floyd, and all of it was real. Ben Shapiro wants him pardoned by Donald Trump. None of us wants an endless war. I don't know what impression that is anymore. Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. Nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians. My team and I stand ready to work under President Trump's strong leadership to get a peace that lasts. Okay, well, if he is still the avatar, the proxy, the Manchurian candidate of the global regime, and he's speaking on behalf of the global regime in these statements, and the global regime, of course, are quote unquote Ukrainians. I mean, at the very top level, if it is the Khazarian mafia, and the Khazarian mafia seat is clearly in Ukraine, and you might remember the Rothschild house being lit up blue and yellow at the beginning, and of course, they are who established the other proxy state of Israel, and they're doing the whole greater Israel thing, and they're trying to preserve the quote unquote homeland. Well, then that would make Zelensky the mouthpiece, the avatar of that same global regime. And so if he's claiming that nobody wants peace more than them, well, the unfortunate part is he continues to push for peace only under their terms, and they have no leverage. He goes on, we are ready to work fast to end the war, and the first stages could be the release of prisoners and truce in the sky. Ban on missiles, long-range drones, bombs on energy and other civilian infrastructure, and truce in the sea immediately if Russia will do the same. Then we want to move very fast through all the next stages and to work with the U.S. to agree a strong final deal. Now, is Russia waging war in all those ways? It's hard to believe that they are. Every time we see an example of Russia doing that, it turns out to be complete and total bullshit, like the attack on Chernobyl, or like all the claims of attacks on Zaporozhye, or the claims of cluster bomb attacks on schools and maternity hospitals. And then the counterclaims where the Ukrainian troops are holed up there. And again, all of these stories may have happened in reality, just not in real time as they're being told to us. He goes on, we do really value how much America has done to help Ukraine maintain its sovereignty and independence. And we remember the moment when things changed. We remember the moment when things changed, when President Trump provided Ukraine with javelins. We are grateful for this. So that's when things changed in Donald Trump's first term? What does he mean? Our meeting in Washington at the White House on Friday did not go the way it was supposed to be. It is regrettable that it happened this way. It is time to make things right. We would like future cooperation and communication to be constructive. Regarding the agreement on minerals and security, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time and in any convenient format. We see this agreement as a step toward greater security and solid security guarantees, and I truly hope it will work effectively. Well, no, there are no security guarantees. And that's the point. That has always been the point. There is no security guarantee whatsoever. The fact that the U.S. will be doing business there means that there will be American assets there that would be ostensibly protected by Americans. And if those were to be struck by foreign powers, those could be considered acts of war, potentially. So there's that. But besides that, there's nothing. And there's no leverage for them to get anything. That is what all this has been about the last couple of weeks. Andy Artist in the chat is now a monthly supporter. Thank you very much. Let us continue. So Zelensky, that is his apology that things did not go the way they intended. Not exactly the world's greatest apology, but what are you going to get out of a regime avatar, a comedic actor who is pretending to be president of a fake nation? What can you expect? All we have are story elements. That's all I can give you. And we can try to make sense about what they want us to believe and then understand that we are dealing with people who cannot stop lying about anything ever, and that we're in the middle of an information war, and that nothing but psychological warfare is what we can expect. White House seeks plan for possible Russia sanctions relief, sources say. This is Reuters from yesterday. That's Trump and Putin in the first term. The United States is drawing up a plan to potentially give Russia sanctions relief as President Donald Trump seeks to restore ties with Moscow and stop the war in Ukraine. This is a person familiar always. The White House has asked the State and Treasury Departments to draft a list of sanctions that could be eased for U.S. officials to discuss with Russian representatives in the coming days as part of the administration's broad talks with Moscow on improving diplomatic and economic relations, the sources said. The sanctions offices are now drawing up a proposal for lifting sanctions on select entities and individuals, including some Russian oligarchs, according to the sources. Now, that is very interesting. What would happen if these sanctions were lifted? I don't know if that freezes any of the repo-held assets or not. Those assets that we talked about being frozen from Russian state-owned companies, Russian oligarchs, etc. It's called the Repo Act in Congress. That is what they were trying to pass during the illegitimate Biden administration, to be able to take all of those Russian assets and redeploy them, which is essentially theft by the global banking regime on a massive scale, capable of destroying the dollar as the global reserve currency. So-called options papers are often drafted by officials working on sanctions, but the White House's specific request for one in recent days underscores Trump and his advisors' willingness to ease Russian sanctions as part of a potential deal with Moscow. It was not immediately clear what Washington could specifically seek in return for any sanctions relief. Russia is one of the biggest oil producers, and if U.S. sanctions on its energy system were eased, it could prevent fuel prices from rising if Trump cracks down on oil exports from OPEC member Iran. Skipping down. U.S. sanctions on Russia since the 2022 invasion of Ukraine have included measures aimed at limiting revenues from the country's huge oil and gas industry and weakening its ability to fund the war. Western governments, led by Washington, imposed a $60 per barrel price cap on Russia's oil exports. Biden also hit Moscow with designations on Russian energy companies and vessels that shipped its oil, including Washington's toughest yet measures on January 10th, shortly before leaving office. Trump in January threatened to ramp up sanctions on Russia if Putin was unwilling to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, but more recently, Trump administration officials have openly acknowledged the possibility of easing sanctions on Moscow. And of course, those sanctions should be eased, should be lifted. Not that Russia cares, though it might affect American businesses' ability to do business with Russia or whatever. PXO says, when will the podcast be available for replay? Today. Thanks if anyone knows. Yes, only the subscriber stream has been unavailable for days at a time. The replay of these will be available today. And go to the Substack. I'm your moderator.substack.com. Subscribe over there, and you will get all of this every day. And it should also flow to podcast apps as well. The YouTube, I will re-upload to YouTube. It'll be there as well. And that should give everybody the opportunity to watch this. And I'll be doing that in general so that, you know, premium subscribers on Rumble and on Substack will be able to watch the subscriber streams. And if you're not a premium subscriber, and I understand that not everybody can be paying to do things like that, and I totally get it, those will be made available to everyone in the hours after and for the subscriber stream the days after, so that all of it will eventually be available. And of course, lately I've been cutting up these clips, which reminds me, if you think that there is something that I did or said on the show that is worth clipping, by all means, feel free to hit me up on social media, whether it's Telegram, Truth Social, whatever. Give me a timestamp. Or if you use your screen record feature or rip from YouTube, there are apps for that online. It's not that hard, I promise. Those clips can be reposted and used. I'm open to all of that kind of feedback. I love if you see something that you say, I know my friend is not going to watch a 3-hour-long live stream, but I can get my friend to watch a 3-minute long clip, and you know where that 3-minute long clip is in a live stream, just let me know. Okay. Let me know and I'll clip it out. No problem at all. I'm happy. That actually saves me time, because otherwise I have to think about my episode afterward, think about where there were points that I want to spread more broadly and ways that I might like to put together a clip. And then that's more stuff for me. So if you're able to help with that, thank you. Wonderful. Couple more things, and then we will get out of here for the day. Let's go first to, this is Yahoo News reprinting Ukrainska Pravda, like state news of Ukraine. So this is pro-Ukraine propaganda, or at least reporting. CIA maintains 12 secret bases in Ukraine. CIA head was in Kyiv last week, according to the New York Times. Actually, let's just jump over to the New York Times. Might as well just do that if we can. Or perhaps they are linking to the old article from the New York Times where the Times revealed that, oh, actually, it's just all of our intel services running things over in Ukraine. It's our intel services creating all these Ukrainian Nazis. The Spy War, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. Yes, so this was the piece from last year. So let's jump back to, is this also referencing? Oh, this is also referencing the piece from last year. I saw this pop up today. I was like, let's get back on this because it is such an important reminder. But obviously, this man is no longer the CIA chief. That was a total brain fart on my part. So let's skip forward to, I was like, oh, the false reality government CIA is still running things in whatever way they see fit, despite the new administration. That would have been quite bold. The Telegraph UK, British nuclear weapons can protect Canada against Trump, says Trudeau party candidate. So this is Chrystia Freeland, whose grandfather was a Nazi propagandist and who is one of the favorites of the World Economic Forum and also a frequent guest of the Bill Maher Show over many years. Canada should seek closer ties with Britain because its nuclear weapons can help protect the country against Donald Trump a Liberal Party leader running to replace Justin Trudeau has said. In order to guarantee our security, Ms. Freeland said she would build closer security partnerships with European NATO allies and, quote, I would be sure that France and Britain were there who possessed nuclear weapons. I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship in a time when the United States can be a threat. A threat? Very interesting. So, British nuclear weapons are going to protect the great state of Canada. Canada, as part of the British Commonwealth, that we can see in many ways optical and can evidence with plenty of information about the collapse of the Commonwealth, how Commonwealth nations are coming under the protection of Russia or China, how the colonial powers are being kicked out of these nations. And then with the articles like the one we went through yesterday about how the British military essentially doesn't exist, hasn't fought in decades, don't even really have access to their nuclear arsenal, at least not in a way that would be functional. Now, I think most of you probably know what I think about that, but they're the ones admitting it. And at the same time, Chrystia Freeland's suggesting that somehow the British are going to be able to protect Canada with their nukes. No, sorry, the Commonwealth has collapsed. The great state of Canada will be ours. And nuclear weapons are pie in the sky. And so let's wrap this up here. We heard a bit about BlackRock from Pierre de Gaulle earlier and how much they are taking over. It is my suspicion that BlackRock at this point is a drainage vehicle for companies large and small, potentially countries. Also, a great deal of American territory, land, under BlackRock's possession. And this will eventually be, and probably already has been in my estimation, nationalized and in some way returned to the American people. And these are the kinds of questions that we're going to have to think about going forward. What would happen in a scenario like that? So this is Bloomberg. BlackRock's mega ports deal marks new reach, hands win to Trump. That's odd, isn't it? BlackRock handing a win to Trump? That doesn't even seem to make sense in many of the ways that people have thought about BlackRock over these last many years. And I'm not saying those ways are wrong. I don't know that they're wrong, okay? I'm just saying we have to look at these things in multiple ways. And this is a way that I've been considering BlackRock for many years now. And it's things like this that emerge in reality that would indicate that perhaps that view of BlackRock might be accurate. And if it is accurate now, then certainly it has been accurate the whole time. BlackRock led one of the biggest acquisitions of the year in a deal that marked both the firm's expanded reach and infrastructure and a win for U.S. President Donald Trump, who had raised concerns over control of key ports near the Panama Canal. The world's biggest asset manager led a consortium that will buy a controlling stake in Panama ports that have become a political lightning rod and a larger unit that has operations across 23 countries. C.K. Hutchison, the conglomerate founded by Hong Kong billionaire Li Ka-shing, said it would receive cash proceeds of more than $19 billion from the sale. Ka-shing, if you know what I mean. The deal is a major victory for Trump, who had argued that China had taken over the critical waterway without providing evidence and that the U.S. was paying too much for the passage of ships. He previously demanded the fees charged on U.S. naval and merchant ships to be lowered, or else Panama should return the canal to the U.S. They talk more about the deal's structure, infrastructure expansion. The transaction represents the largest infrastructure deal in BlackRock's history, after it bought infrastructure specialist GIP last year in a push further into private markets. BlackRock executive officer Larry Fink, speaking at an RBC Capital Markets conference, said the deal was a great opportunity for the asset manager and highlighted the company's long relationship with C.K. Hutchison. Hutchison could see the writing on the wall that strategically it was best for them as well as for Panama to pursue its interests elsewhere, said Evan Ellis, Latin America research professor with the U.S. Army War College. The deal could also relieve pressure on Panama President Jose Raul Mulino, who has been attempting to ward off Trump's designs on the control of the Panama Canal, which was handed over to the local government in 1999. It's positive to the extent it helps Mulino to diminish the Chinese footprint in Panama and placate Trump, said Risa Grace Targo, director for Latin America at Eurasia Group. That is Ian Bremmer's globalist think tank. The White House had no immediate comment. The Trump administration and members of the U.S. Congress were briefed on the agreement, according to a person familiar with the matter. Panama will review the transaction, and the audit of the Panama ports contract will continue, according to a statement posted to Molina's account on X, formerly Twitter. Hutchison has run the ports in Panama's Balboa and Cristobal under a concession that was first signed in 1997 and in 2021 extended until 2047. The acquisition of the ports will require government sign-off, BlackRock said. So, Trump would still be in control of this entire situation. The sign-off would be required. The BlackRock deal would make no difference. Maybe this is itself a path toward the public disclosure of that BlackRock nationalization, or BlackRock as a drainage mechanism. We shall see. The other interesting thing here, let me just pull that back up for just a moment. So it's being taken away from China, being returned in some sense to Panama and to American control, which is BlackRock. And so let's recall yesterday. Did Trump, in anticipation of this deal, the announcement of this deal, go ahead and start talking about the Panama Canal and taking it back for America so that he could then seize that narrative and reroute it in his direction, moving from the Great Reset into what my friend Burning Bright calls the Good Reset, steering things another way, drafting off that situation the whole time, preempting the announcement so that it's obvious that Trump is credited with this, that American and America First ideologies are credited with this, and then moving forward in a different direction, the people helping spur that direction forward. That is a possibility. Then there's also, of course, the worst possible possibility, which is that we are being dog walked into dystopia and Donald Trump is just handing the world over to the Great Reset while we all applaud like seals. That's possible. I think that's highly unlikely. I don't think there's much reason to have woken the people of the world up over these last many years. And Donald Trump is the catalyst for much of that and at the forefront of much of that, but it's happening all around the world. There wouldn't be a lot of point in waking the people up if you were just going to do that and steer all of these things off. You would make the arguments, like I said yesterday, from the techno-libertarian perspective, for instance, that we don't need a sprawling federal government and that these things are better localized and fragmented and decentralized, even if they're not promoting ultimately American ideologies. Maybe they're just promoting a global oligarchy, for instance, where they own the territories along the coasts and the mountainous regions and all the fertile farmlands and whatever kind of employment class needs to exist, the useless eaters out there. They would just be in their towers, the homeless housing that they're building for their imported foreign slaves. You could see that agenda coming into being, with BlackRock being a big part of that, of course, because they're buying up so much American territory and land, and also single family housing, and of course, funding investments in this kind of homeless housing where they take plots of land and build high towers that, and that's part of their agenda for the suburbs that Donald Trump was able to dismantle. Waking everybody up to the understanding of what they are attempting to do, and then convincing people that that is an awful dystopian outcome, doesn't seem like the sort of thing that the controlled opposition would be doing while they're attempting to gatekeep and keep people inside that central narrative bubble. These things seem to me to be coming from outside of that central narrative, and Donald Trump, as the catalyst to the awakening, seems to be leading these things off in a direction that makes a lot of sense under that interpretation and very little sense under the other one. And so that is why I fall on the one side rather than the other when it comes to the question of whether or not we are being dog-walked into that dystopia. I would submit that we are not. And so I am checking out the chat one last time. Not much there. I hope that you all enjoyed the show. Thank you for hanging out. Thank you for enjoying the chat. I hope that the changeover to Rumble Premium was not terribly disruptive, although we did lose about 50% plus of the audience. So I'm going to have to keep considering how to do this on the way through. But with that, I will be back tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern. Okay. And we're just going to do an hour or two on Trump's speech from tonight, the speech before the joint session of Congress that would usually be known as a State of the Union, but is tonight known as the joint speech because this is what they do when it's the first one of these for a newly inaugurated president. And tonight, Donald Trump will be a newly inaugurated president, potentially. We'll see what's going to happen, whether this March 4th date is just a coincidence and meaningless, or whether there is something more to it. Donald Trump said he's going to bring it. He's going to tell it like it is. So I'm looking forward to it. I imagine you are too. We are going to be on this evening with some coverage on Badlands Media. So you can find us by searching Badlands Media on Rumble. I assume many of you are already following that. Maybe we'll be on YouTube. I'm not sure. The other platforms, I'm not sure. But regardless, I will be back tomorrow at, that time. Same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic. And Joe Biden was never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com. And for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. Down on the range.